Introduction. On living with other creatures. Some families consist of people who love one another, even though they regularly argue about the right temperature for the living room, how dishwasher duties should be divided, and whether a lamp really needs to be left on all the time. Other families also have animals. That does not make things easier, but it does make them considerably more interesting. In my family, there is Anna, who believes a household can function with lists. Tom, who is convinced that every problem can be solved with a firm tone of voice and enough treats. Jewel, who smells of vanilla, books, and the sweater she has been meaning to get rid of for 3 winters now. Then there is Calais. Calais is a dog, a large brown mutt with floppy ears, too much enthusiasm, and a remarkable willingness to admire humans for activities they invented themselves. He runs after balls even though they never asked him to. He lets himself be put on a leash, even though a leash is clearly just a rope with bad publicity. And he sits down when someone says, "Sit." My name is Cleo. I am a cat. I sit down when I think it is appropriate. That is the essential difference between the two of us. For a long time, I considered these differences a matter of natural order. Cats on top, dogs below. Humans somewhere in between, depending on whether they were currently able to open a can. Then came the boxes, and Calais, who understood me in a way I am still not entirely willing to explain. Chapter 1. The Dog File. A Seat with Consequences. The dog got a treat because he sat down. That was the moment I decided to study the family scientifically. It was a Tuesday morning, insofar as days have any significance to an animal with neither appointments nor trousers. Outside, the sky hung in a dull gray over the garden. Raindrops trembled on the window pane, and the radiator beneath my paw worked with a dedication I had rarely observed in humans. I was lying on my windowsill in the living room. It was the best spot in the house, worn, elevated, with a view of the garden, the kitchen, and the place in the hallway where someone occasionally set down a bed that was excellent to sit on. Calais was sitting on the rug. Tom stood in front of him, his right hand in his jacket pocket, his left raised like a magician just before a mediocre trick. "Sit," he said. Calais sat down. "Yes, good boy, very well done, Calais, great." Tom pulled a small, dry piece of something from this pocket and handed it to him with the solemnity of a man awarding a medal for bravery. Calais took the treat gently between his teeth. His tail thumped against the rug. His whole body radiated joy, as though he had not merely folded his hind legs, but climbed a mountain, put out a fire, and stabilized the global economy on the side. I looked at him. Then I looked at Tom. I had been sitting for at least 20 minutes. Upright enough to project dignity, relaxed enough not to make anyone feel that I had made an effort. I was sitting on a windowsill narrower than Calais' entire attention span. I was sitting without a command, without bribery, and without beating my tail against the floor like a piece of furniture in a storm. No one said, "Cleo, you are the best cat in the world." No one handed me cheese. There was not even an appropriate compliment for my consistent monitoring of the premises. At that moment, I realized that our family did not lack love. It lacked a fair compensation system. "Again," said Tom. Calais sprang up. "Sit." Calais sat down. "Perfect. You're so smart." I blinked slowly. Calais was not smart. Calais was motivated. Those were entirely different things. Tom could have gotten a laundry basket to sit if there had been enough cheese inside it. Calais glanced over at me. He was not panting. It was too early in the morning for that. But his eyes shone in that open, friendly way they always did when a human said his name or a wrapper rustled. I returned his gaze with sober professionalism. Callie was 4 years old, and as the humans like to say, a rescue dog. Before coming to us, he had apparently been through several homes. To the humans, this meant they became especially moved by every one of his achievements. To Callie, it mainly meant that he never overlooked a crumb of food and went into an emotional state of emergency at the sound of car keys. To me, it meant that he now lived in my house. More precisely, in a house Anna and Tom had bought, Jewel lived in from time to time. Callie regarded as an enormous playground, and which I made into a home simply by being there. Humans tended to overestimate their role in such matters. Anna came in from the kitchen and placed 2 coffee cups on the dining table. She was wearing a soft gray sweater, and her hair was pinned up in a hurry. 1 strand hung in her face. I knew that state. It meant she was already thinking about at least 5 things at once, and none of them involved me. An organizational error, but a frequent one. "You're training again already?" she asked. Tom straightened up. "Consistency is important." Callie sat down again without anyone saying anything. Tom smiled proudly. "See, he's already offering the behavior on his own." "He's offering you his hindquarters," Anna said, taking a sip of coffee. "That is not the same thing as education." Tom laughed as though she had made a joke. Anna had not made a joke. She was simply better at recognizing reality. Callie wagged anyway. Perhaps he generally regarded laughter as approval. There was something touching about that attitude, though also dangerous. Humans sometimes laughed at things they later regretted. I had often observed this, especially in videos in which someone attempted to assemble a piece of furniture themselves. "Callie," said Tom, "down." Callie lay down. Wonderful. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course, I could lie down too. I was exceptionally good at lying down, in fact, in a variety of forms. Curled up, stretched out, half draped over an armrest, with 1 paw over my eyes, or on an object a human apparently needed urgently. Lying down was one of my core competencies. But no one stood in front of me and said, "Down." And even if someone had tried, things would have gone differently. Not because I would not have understood the command, but because I had principles. The front door opened, and cold air swept through the hallway. Jewel came in, carrying a large cardboard box in front of her. She balanced it in both arms so that only her forehead and her messy dark hair were visible above it. "Can someone help me?" she asked. "Where does it go?" Anna called. "In my room." Took the box from her and set it down briefly in the hallway. Callie immediately sprang up, because every change in the house was an invitation for him to involve his entire body. He sniffed the box. He sniffed on the left. He sniffed on the right. He even sniffed the top, although there was clearly only cardboard there. "No, Callie," said Jewel, "that's not for you." That was an interesting sentence. I stood up, not hurriedly. Hurrying would have been beneath my dignity, but with purpose. When the box was finally in Jewel's room, I waited exactly long enough to avoid getting the impression that I was interested. Then I followed it. Jewel's room smelled as it always did. Of her, shampoo, fabric, paper, and the faint scent of the candle she sometimes lit and Anna regularly forgot to put out. Clothes lay on the bed. 2 more boxes stood beside the desk, one open, the other already sealed with tape. The new box was large, very large. It was also empty. Some moments in life reveal themselves immediately as opportunities. I jumped inside. The walls were high enough to provide shelter, yet low enough to keep the surroundings under control. The floor was sturdy, the smell fresh, the air pleasantly muted. It was a property in an excellent location, with minimal maintenance requirements. I turned around once, sat down, and looked up at Jewel. She smiled. "Of course," she said, "not even 5 seconds." I could have explained to her that good architecture must be recognized when one encounters it. Instead, I neatly curled my tail over my paws. That was enough. Calla appeared in the doorway. He stopped, his head tilted slightly to one side. Then he came closer and stuck his nose into the box. He did not have whiskers, but if he had, they would have been pressed against the cardboard now. I stared at him. He stared back. "Out," I said calmly. Calla wagged. As usual, he understood the tone, not the content. "This is my box," I explained. "You are too large, too damp, and insufficiently complex for this housing concept." Calla sniffed once more, then he pulled his head back and sneezed. Jewel laughed. Cleo has found her new house. Her new house. An accurate expression, though with unnecessary emphasis on the matter of ownership. Tom set a second box beside the first. Anna came in, holding an armful of books, and looked around. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the boxes. "It's starting to become real," she said quietly. "Yes," said Jewel. Her voice sounded different than usual. Not sad, not exactly. More like a room in which someone had opened a window and no longer knew whether the fresh air felt good or made them shiver. Calla sat beside Jewel's leg and looked up at her. This time he did not get a treat. He remained sitting anyway. Even I noticed that. I made a small note in my head, not about Jewel, about Calla. Until then I had sorted his qualities neatly: loud, food-oriented, excessively sociable, susceptible to balls, questionably enthusiastic about walks. Now something was added that I did not yet know how to classify. He seemed to notice when something in a room was not right. That was inconvenient for my theory, and therefore, presumably, an isolated case. Shortly afterward, Jewel withdrew her hand, smiled again, and clapped once. "All right then. Who's helping me pack the books?" Calla jumped up as though he'd just been elected mayor. Tom took a stack of novels from the shelf. Anna began folding scarves. I sank deeper into my box and observed the situation. In an orderly household, someone had to keep an overview. While the rain grew heavier outside, my family packed away things they apparently wanted to keep: books, sweaters, photographs, a small lamp with a crooked shade. Calla went back and forth among them all, offering his help, although no one knew exactly what form it took. I stayed in the box. After all, I had already taken on the most important task: securing the territory. Later, when Tom reached for his jacket and Calla immediately sprang up, I heard the clinking of the leash. Calla ran to the front door. Outside, it was raining so heavily by then that even the birds had stopped singing their pointless songs about freedom. "Come on, Calla," said Tom. "Walk." Calla wagged as though he'd just been offered a trip to the seaside. I sat up in my box. A dog, I thought, who voluntarily wanted to go outside in weather like this was not merely a puzzle. He was a research project. The dog file was open. Chapter 2. Water is not a hobby. On rain, dignity, and wet paws. Rain is water that comes down from above without being asked. No sensible animal would voluntarily go outside in it. Kale was already wagging his tail by the door. He stood next to Tom. Well-groomed would have been the wrong word, but inwardly he seemed well-groomed. His tail thumped against the coat rack, the shoe cabinet, and once against Anna's shopping bag, until a packet of tissues fell out. Tom put on his rain jacket. Kale watched every movement with the focused devotion of someone waiting for the lottery numbers to be announced. "It's raining buckets," Anna said from the kitchen. "He doesn't mind," Tom said. Kale confirmed this with a sound somewhere between a sneeze, a snort, and a small outburst of personal enthusiasm. I was still sitting in Jewel's box, looking toward the front door. Outside, the world was blurred. The garden had lost its colors and consisted only of dark grass, gleaming stones, and water gathering on every surface that had not asked for it. A leaf was stuck to the window. It looked more sensible than Kale. "You don't have to come along," Jewel said, glancing over at me, as though I had ever given anyone reason to suspect otherwise. I drew one paw closer to my belly and blinked slowly. The gesture meant, "I know. Also, speak more quietly, I'm resting." Kale, on the other hand, pushed his way through the half-open door before Tom had properly clipped on the leash. The leash clinked against his collar. A rope with a metal clasp. A device clearly intended to restrict his freedom of movement. Kale apparently regarded it as an honor. "Slow down," Tom said. Kale did not slow down. He merely became louder. Then the two of them disappeared into the rain. I waited until the front door had clicked shut. Then I jumped out of the box, went to the windowsill in the hallway, and took up my observation post. You have to give research subjects space so they can behave naturally. That is a basic rule of science. Besides, I wanted to see how long it would take Kale to realize he had made a mistake. Tom opened the garden gate. Kale shot outside. Not cautiously. Not with his head held high and an assessing look, as was proper in unfamiliar weather conditions. He ran into the garden as though the rain had personally written to him and invited him to a party. His paws splashed through a puddle. Then he stopped. I held my breath. Perhaps he had noticed. The cold, the wetness, the water running from his back, down his sides and collecting in his fur until he looked like a poorly maintained carpet. Kale looked down. Then he jumped into the same puddle with all four paws. Water splashed up to his belly. Tom laughed. "Having fun, are you?" Kale answered with a short bark and ran on. There are situations in which an observation is so clear that it requires no interpretation. A dog who voluntarily jumps into a puddle either has no instinct for self-preservation or a personal feud with dry paws. "Do you see him?" Joel asked behind me. I turned my head. She was standing in the hallway, a cup in her hand, also looking outside. Her face had that soft expression people got when they watched Kale do something unreasonable. They only rarely looked at me that way. Usually when I slept on a fresh pile of laundry or investigated a houseplant that was supposedly not meant for cats. "He loves rain," she said. I looked outside again. Kale had reached the lawn by then and lowered his nose into the wet grass. He sniffed with such dedication that it was as if he were reading an especially exciting message. Perhaps it said, "Warning, everything is wet," or "This garden is the same as it was 2 hours ago," or simply, "Water." "He's not entirely sound of mind," I said. Jewel took a sip from her cup. "That's what Cleo always says, too." That was not an answer. It was an insult, spoken in a calm voice. I decided not to watch the rest of the walk. Scientific distance was important. Besides, the rain had begun drumming against the pane, and the sound alone made the tip of my left ear twitch. Water had a legitimate function. It stood in bowls. It dripped in a controlled manner from faucets. It occasionally appeared in glasses from which people drank, while inexplicably pretending it tasted like nothing. But water falling from clouds was a planning error of nature. People did similarly strange things with water, incidentally. They voluntarily stood beneath showers. They turned on a tap, waited for it to become warm, and then soaked their entire bodies. Some of them sang while doing it. Once, I had watched Anna through the half-open bathroom door. She stood beneath a broad stream of water, her eyes closed, as though she were either very sad or very brave. Afterwards, she wrapped herself in a large towel and claimed she felt fresh now. Fresh was a word people used when they wanted to admit they were cold without seeming weak. My own grooming routine was far more efficient. You cleaned selectively. Paw, fur, shoulder, belly. No unnecessary flooding. No soap in the eyes. No tiles to slip on. And above all, no humans knocking on the door and asking whether everything was all right. Of course everything was all right. I was grooming myself. The problem was that humans apparently confused great effort with quality. Anyone who stood underwater for 20 minutes was considered well-groomed. Anyone who carefully licked themselves for 3 minutes was treated like a cat. This unequal treatment was not new, but it was symptomatic. When Tom and Kale came back, it was almost noon. I heard them in the hallway before I saw them. First came the turning of the key, then Tom's footsteps, then the dull, heavy slapping of wet dog paws on the floor. Finally, a shake that ran through the whole house like a small earthquake with fur. "Kale," Anna called. Too late. Water droplets flew through the hallway. One landed on the shoe cabinet, 2 on the mirror, and 1 on a doormat that had until then given the impression of having arrived here dry. Kale stood in the middle of the devastation and looked satisfied. He smelled of rain, earth, and the unmistakable pride of a creature that had experienced something wonderful outdoors without bringing back a single useful object. "You little drip machine," Anna said, but her voice did not sound truly angry. She came from the bathroom carrying a large towel. Kale ducked slightly as she laid it over his back. Not out of fear, more out of the cautious hope that the whole thing would be over quickly. Tom rubbed him dry. I watched the scene from the stair railing. The position was excellent, high enough not to be mistaken for the towel, close enough to grasp the full extent of the humiliation. Kale was being worked over by two adults with a thick beige piece of fabric, while Anna repeatedly said, "Hold still, my big boy." Kale held still. That was the moment when I first thought that dogs had astonishing patience for things they obviously disliked. He had loved the rain. Of that I was convinced. But he did not enjoy being dried off. His ears lay flat, and his gaze wandered helplessly through the hallway, as if he were looking for a lawyer. "Almost done," Tom said. Kale gave a quiet, deep sigh. It was not a dramatic sound, more like a small cloud of exhaustion. Jewel came out of her room, stopped in the doorway, and laughed. "He looks like a crumpled bear." Kale looked up at her. She knelt down and stroked his forehead. Immediately, his tail began moving again, slowly at first, then more strongly. That was interesting. He had endured the towel, but a hand on his head seemed to make the entire process bearable. I made a mental note. Callie responds to touch with exaggerated relief. Possible cause, limited ability to soothe himself. Then Callie looked up at me. His gaze settled on my dry fur. I sat on the railing. My paws were clean. My tail lay elegantly around my body. No towel had touched me. No person had held me in the hallway and claimed it was for my own good. "Yes," I said, "you could have stayed home." Callie sneezed. I took that as agreement. Half an hour later, the situation in the house had calmed down. Tom had disappeared into his office. Anna was on the phone in the kitchen, saying things like, "No, I can't take that on as well," which usually meant that in the end, she would. Jewel continued packing books into boxes. Callie had settled onto his blanket. He was dry, but not content. You could tell because every few minutes he got up, turned in a circle, lay down again, and then sighed as though the floor itself were personally responsible for his restlessness. I had retreated to the bathroom. Not because I wanted to avoid him. I was simply pursuing an investigation of my own. The faucet at the sink was dripping, not much. A drop fell into the white porcelain roughly every 10 seconds. It gathered briefly at the metal edge, trembled, grew heavier, and finally let go, plink. I sat on the rim of the sink and watched it. Water was perfectly acceptable in small quantities. A single drop possessed precision. It had a beginning, a shape, and an end. It did not arrive with wind, mud, and the absurd expectation that you should be cheerful afterward. Plink. I stretched out a paw. The drop hit my fur, cool, round. It was there immediately, and immediately gone. I licked my paw. Plink. This time I tried to catch the drop before it hit. My claw clicked against the porcelain. The drop burst, and a tiny splash hit my nose. I recoiled. Not frightened, just surprised by water's rudeness. Behind me, I heard a snort. Callie was standing in the bathroom doorway. His head was tilted. His ears still hung slightly damply downward. He looked at me, then at the faucet, then back at me. "What?" I asked. Callie took a step closer. "I'm investigating something." He sniffed the air. "It's about precision," I explained. "About control, about the aesthetic quality of limited moisture." Callie sat down. I waited for him to mock my method. Dogs could not speak, but they had other ways of expressing incomprehension. Tilting their heads, for example, or that slow blinking that made them seem as though they were politely listening to a bad lecture. Callie did none of that. He simply watched as the next drop fell. Plink. This time, I caught it with my paw. Almost. A small splash landed on Callie's nose. Then he sneezed. I could not help it. I purred briefly, not loudly. There was no need to exaggerate the matter, but clearly enough for Callie to wag his tail. "You see," I said, "water is only acceptable when you have it under control." Callie studied the faucet, then he turned around, walked out, and left two still slightly damp paw prints on the tiles. I watched them. Perhaps he thought my drop ritual was just as foolish as I considered his enthusiasm for puddles. Perhaps he regarded me as overly cautious, complicated, or unnecessarily proud of dry fur. An unpleasant thought. I pushed it aside. Not every thought needed to be pursued further. Some were like dust bunnies beneath the sofa, present but not urgent. In the afternoon, Callie began rolling around on the living room carpet. First he scratched his back, then he rolled onto his side. Finally, with remarkable energy, he turned onto his back, stretched all four legs into the air, and rubbed his head against the carpet. It looked as though he were trying to polish himself. Anna came in, stopped, and folded her arms. "Oh no," she said. Callie froze. Humans had different tones of voice. There was the tone for "come here," the tone for "stop that," the tone for "who did this," which was often asked even though the answer was standing right in front of them. And then there was Anna's "oh no" tone. It meant bath. Callie got up slowly. His tail hung lower than usual. "You smell like a bog again," Anna said. Callie looked at her as though this were an unjustified accusation. "You're going in the tub." He took a step backward. I was sitting on the sofa and sat up straighter. The tub was a smooth white basin humans use for their voluntary water rituals. For dogs, apparently, it served as a correctional facility. Callie did not have to be carried into it. You had to give him credit for that. He walked there on his own, though with the heavy dignity of a man summoned for questioning. I followed at an appropriate distance, not out of spite, out of scientific interest. Anna put a non-slip mat in the tub. Callie put in one paw, then the second. When the water touched his belly, he lifted his head and looked toward the ceiling as if he wished to file a complaint there. "Easy," Anna said. Callie was calm. That was nearly the most unsettling thing about him. He did not like it. That was obvious. Yet he trusted Anna enough to stay. She spoke softly to him while she wet his fur. Callie closed his eyes. Not relaxed, more resigned. I sat on the closed toilet lid, keeping my paws tucked firmly beneath me. "You're learning," I said. Callie opened one eye. "Rain outside, bad idea. Water in a tub, even worse idea. I'm glad you recognize the difference." He snorted water out of his nose. Anna laughed. "Cleo is probably giving very helpful commentary again." I was. After the bath, Callie was dried off again. This time he did not shake himself until Anna had put the towel down. An entire fountain flew through the bathroom. Anna shrieked. I jumped onto the laundry basket. Callie stood in the middle of the room and wagged his tail as though he had just presented a particularly brilliant solution. "Callie," he sat down. "Not the sitting too," Anna muttered. Tom appeared in the doorway, saw the wet floor, the wet dog, and Anna with damp strands of hair stuck to her cheek. "Good boy," he said automatically. Callie received a treat. I closed my eyes. It was unbelievable. The dog had been bathed, dried, stripped of his own smells, caused a flood, and received a reward because he sat down. Meanwhile, I had accompanied the entire process without panicking, without attempting to flee, and without a single drop touching my fur. No one acknowledged my achievement. Callie lay on his blanket in the living room. He was finally clean, dry, and so tired that his tail only thumped once against the floor when Jules sat down beside him. I lay on the sofa. That was my spot. The middle cushion was warm. The blanket smelled of Anna. And from there I could see the garden, which still gleamed like a bad idea. Callie lifted his head. He looked at the sofa, then at me, then at Anna, who came in carrying a basket of laundry. Slowly he stood up. Perhaps he only wanted to stretch. Perhaps he wanted to test whether the cushion was soft enough. Perhaps after that day he had decided that a dog, too, had the right to civilized rest. He placed one paw on the sofa. "Callie, down," Anna said immediately. Callie pulled his paw back. He looked at Anna, then at the sofa, then at me. I remained on the middle cushion. Anna said nothing to me. Callie went back to his blanket. His gaze rested on me for another moment. Not accusingly, more questioningly. I looked at the empty space beside me, then at Anna, then back at Callie. Apparently there were rules in our house that had nothing to do with cleanliness, size, or behavior. rules that had simply come into being because people had repeated them often enough. Calais was not allowed on the sofa. I was. And for the first time, I wondered whether that was really because I deserved it. The thought was unpleasant. I wrapped my tail more tightly around my paws and decided to manage it internally for the time being. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, Calais lay on his blanket and smelled of dog shampoo. I lay on the sofa and smelled of success. But the matter of the rules, I thought, was not yet settled. Chapter 3: Couch Privileges and Cardboard Duty. On rules, possession, and the question of who actually lives here. There are rules in our house. Most of them apply to Calais. I ignore the rest. This arrangement had proven itself over the years, at least from my perspective. Humans needed rules, because without them, they did things like closing the balcony door when the sun was shining outside, or putting the food bowl in the dishwasher, even though there was clearly still a usable bit stuck around the edge. Calais needed rules because he liked them. That was his real weakness. He liked the praise afterward. The tone in Tom's voice. The little pause when everyone looked at him as though he had just completed a complicated tax return. One sit was enough, and Calais was ready to consider himself a major contributor to civilization. I, on the other hand, considered myself important even without an audience. It saved time. On the morning after the rain, Calais was lying on his blanket beside the couch. This was no ordinary blanket. No, it was thick, dark blue, and had an embroidered bone around the edge, which I considered an unnecessarily obvious form of labeling. My blanket on the couch was beige, soft, and trimmed with fringe. It lay across the middle cushion, which in turn was my spot. Not because anyone had explicitly assigned it to me. Such formalities were beneath my dignity. I had acquired it through regular presence, fur traces, and the occasional determined stare. Ownership, like so many things, was a matter of consistency. Anna sat at the other end of the couch, writing something on her laptop. Beside her stood a cup of coffee she had already forgotten about. Tom was leafing through a newspaper, even though he could have read the news on his phone. Humans loved overlooking the same information on as many devices as possible. Jewel came out of her room, carrying a stack of clothes. She had a black t-shirt over one arm, a yellow sweater, and a pair of jeans that smelled of detergent and of her. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, with individual strands escaping from it. She looked tired, not sick, not sad enough for people to talk about it, more as though she had been awake late at night, negotiating with thoughts that refused to be persuaded. Colin noticed immediately. He lifted his head, got up, and went over to her, quietly, without his usual greeting spin, during which his entire back half apparently developed an opinion of its own. He simply stood beside her leg and looked up at her. Jewel let the stack of clothes sink and placed a hand on his head. "You're very attentive today," she said softly. Calais wagged once. I observed the scene with professional detachment. Calais had apparently decided to further develop his newly discovered ability to analyze the mood in a room, but not necessarily relevant to the couch issue. And the couch issue was urgent. Calais sat down beside Jewel. His gaze moved to me, then to the couch, then back to me. I could have ignored that look. In fact, I ignored it at first for approximately 3 breaths. Then I stood up, stretched my front paws far forward, and let my back sag. An elegant movement, which also demonstrated that I was neither nervous nor influenced by a dog in any way. I jumped from the middle cushion onto the armrest. Calais looked at me. "If you keep staring at your blanket all the time," I said, "you could at least learn something from it. You don't have to like a place just because humans claim it's meant for you." Calais tilted his head. "Your blanket is down there. The couch is up here. That isn't a natural order. It's habit with upholstery." Calais looked at the couch, then at Anna. Anna kept typing on her laptop. Jewel had gone toward the hallway with her stack of clothes. The situation was favorable. I sat on the armrest and tapped the leather with the tip of my tail. Once, twice. Kale stepped closer. He put one paw on the couch, then pulled it back. His ears went flat. I had to admit it. The dog possessed an almost admirable ability to be intimidated by something someone had said hours earlier. Kale, I said. It's a piece of furniture, not a judge. He let out an audible breath. Then he placed both front paws on the couch and slowly pushed himself up. It was not an elegant process. Dogs had very little sense of aesthetics when jumping. Kale managed to get one hind paw briefly caught on his blanket, slipped sideways, and finally landed with a dull thump on the empty cushion beside me. The couch moved. I did not. That was important. You see, I said, the world hasn't ended. No thunder, no siren. Tom hasn't even given a lecture about consistency. Kale sat very still. His tail was tucked beneath him. His eyes were wide. He looked like someone who had accidentally robbed a bank and was now hoping the matter could be resolved through polite breathing. Then Anna came back from the kitchen. She stopped. Kale froze. So did I, though only inwardly and in solidarity with the experiment. Anna looked at him, then at me, then at the couch. Kale, she said. He jumped down immediately, so quickly that when he landed, he stepped on his own ear with one paw. He caught himself, sat down on his blanket, and looked at Anna as though he had been there all morning. I was disappointed. Not in Anna. Humans were predictably contradictory. But in Kale, we had not even had the opportunity to properly test the rule. Oh, you weren't really up there, Anna finally said. Kale wagged cautiously. But that still remains your exception. He wagged harder. So that was it. An exception. Permission for behavior that was forbidden again in the very same breath. Humans were remarkably creative when it came to phrasing rules in ways that felt right and arbitrary at the same time. Anna sat back down at her laptop. Kale stayed on his blanket. I jumped back onto the middle cushion and lay down. Order had been restored. And that was exactly what bothered me. Not because I desperately wanted Kale beside me on the couch. That would have been an exaggeration. Kale took up a lot of space, breathed loudly, and had the habit of twitching his paws in his sleep, as though chasing dreams that were in a hurry to get away. But he had not damaged anything on the couch. He had not scratched it, worked fur into the fringe, or looked at a single houseplant as though it were a personal enemy. Unlike me. I looked at the side of the armchair across from me. Fine, pale lines ran through the fabric. Anna called them scratch marks. I called them creative renovation. The armchair was old. It needed character. Tom suddenly said. I looked at him. He pointed at the armchair. Not again. I looked at the armchair too. The lines had turned out beautifully. They gave the furniture a certain tension, something unfinished, honest. Humans paid a great deal of money for paintings that looked worse. She doesn't do it on purpose, said Jewel, who was standing in the living room again. Tom raised an eyebrow. Of course she does it on purpose. Jewel smiled. Then at least she has a plan. That was correct. Anna closed her laptop. We could finally put that scratching board next to the armchair. The scratching board has been standing next to it for weeks, Tom said. An uncomfortable silence arose. I looked at the scratching board. It was small, gray, and smelled like a store. It stood exactly where no one voluntarily stood, between the armchair and the plant Anna regularly overwatched. It had no history, no pleasant height, no reaction when you put your claws into it. The armchair, by contrast, gave way. It resisted. It had personality. She likes the fabric, Jewel said. She likes destruction, Tom said. She likes design, I said. No one responded appropriately. Meanwhile, Kale had gotten up and gone over to the old slipper lying beneath the coffee table. It was Tom's slipper, brown, soft, and slightly torn at the toe. An object Tom had owned for years and complained about regularly while continuing to wear it. Kale carefully picked it up in his mouth. I watched him. He lay down on his blanket, held the slipper between his paws, and began to chew on it. Not violently, almost thoughtfully, as though he needed to solve a complicated problem with his teeth. Tom did not notice until a quiet crunching sound could be heard. "Kale, drop it." Kale released the slipper immediately. Tom picked it up. The toe was now clearly torn open. "You're not allowed to do that," he said. Kale lowered his head. His ears hung low. His tail did not move. I waited for the usual lecture. Perhaps a comment about consistency. Perhaps a chart. Tom generally believed that every problem became easier to understand when divided into columns. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside Kale. "You poor guy," he said. "You probably need something to chew on, huh?" Kale cautiously lifted his eyes. "I'll get you a new chew toy later." Kale's tail began to thump. I stared at Tom. The dog had destroyed a slipper and was rewarded with a chew toy. I had beautified an armchair and received a scratching board that looked like a sad piece of cardboard. "That is remarkable," I said to Kale. He wagged. "No, really. You are a case study in the negotiating power of neediness." Kale took a step closer and nudged my paw with his nose. His nose was cool. I did not pull my paw away. That was not an invitation. Only a temporary suspension of my usual hygiene standards. "You didn't take the slipper out of malice," I said more quietly. "You apparently just needed something." Kale looked at me. He did not understand the words, but his gaze softened, as though he had understood that I had just said something important and decided not to ruin it with enthusiasm. Then Joel came in carrying another cardboard box. My priorities changed immediately. The box was smaller than my first one, but it had a particularly sturdy shape, clean edges, and a lid that was half open. It also had "Books, Kitchen, Please Upstairs" written on it in black letters. A clear, factual label. I respected that. "Careful," Joel said as I jumped up and slipped into the box. "There are still things in there." Inside were 3 books, a mug without a handle, a small picture of Joel and Anna by the sea, and a roll of tape. I sat down on the books. They were flat. The mug provided pleasant support at my side. The picture smelled of dust and summer. "Cleo," Joel said with a smile, "that's not a cat basket." I looked at her. Humans tended to judge things by their original purpose. That was a fundamental error in reasoning. A box was no less a box just because someone had decided to put books in it. A table was no less an elevated viewing platform just because humans ate at it. Function emerged through use. Kale appeared beside the box and stuck his nose inside. I sat up. "Not again." He sniffed the books, then the mug, then me. "You don't understand," I explained. "A cardboard box is at once a retreat, a vantage point, a temperature regulator, and an architectural promise." Kale yawned. That was rude, but perhaps I had overwhelmed him. "You see only cardboard," I said. "That is your problem. You always look at the world in terms of what it smells like, whether it moves, or whether you can eat it." Kale tilted his head again. Then he tried to push his snout farther into the box. The side walls gave way. The box slid a little across the floor. Kale startled, pulled his head back, and looked at the object as though it had insulted him. I had to make a serious effort not to purr out loud. "Exactly," I said. "This is not a place for beginners." Joel laughed, knelt down beside us, and scratched Kale behind the ear. "He's just not a box type." Kale closed his eyes briefly. "Not a box type." I liked the phrase. It was precise. Not everyone had to understand cardboard boxes. Not everyone had to sleep on elevated surfaces or accept water only in droplet-sized portions. Some creatures needed wide fields, wet paws, and things to chew. Others needed cardboard, quiet, and a piece of furniture that supported their dignity properly. That thought was almost sensible. I decided not to dwell on it. Anna came out of Joel's room carrying a folded blanket. Her gaze fell on the box, on me, and on Kale, who was still sitting curiously beside it. "Kale, leave Cleo alone," she said. Kale got up and moved 2 steps back. "And you," she said to me. Don't ruin the books. I placed one paw on the top book. It was not an intentional gesture, but it worked. Jewel took the picture out of the box. For a moment she held it in her hand. In the photograph, she was younger, her hair shorter, her mouth wide open in laughter. Anna stood beside her barefoot in the sand. They both looked as though they had not yet known that one day things would have to be packed into boxes. Jewel ran her thumb along the edge of the picture. Then she put it back. Callie stepped closer again, this time very carefully. He touched Jewel's knee with his nose. She looked down at him. "It's okay," she said. Humans often said that when everything was not okay, but they did not yet know how else to say it. Callie stayed with her. I stayed in the box. Each of us had our method. That evening, Callie was lying on his blanket again. I was lying on the couch. My cardboard box stood between us because Jewel had left it in the living room after packing. Apparently, she had come to the correct conclusion that a good box should not be kept far from me. Tom really did bring Callie a new chew toy. Callie accepted it as though Tom had presented him with an award. "Good boy," Tom said. Callie sat down. Of course, he got a treat. I closed my eyes. The rules in this house were unfair, contradictory, and remarkably dependent on who happened to be looking up with big eyes. But perhaps, I thought, while Callie chewed contentedly on his new toy, a rule was not automatically good just because it had existed for a long time. Perhaps it was not automatically bad just because it benefited me. One that required a break. I jumped down from the couch into the box, turned around once between the books and the tape, and lay down. Callie lifted his head. I looked at him over the edge. "Tomorrow," I said, "we'll continue the experiment." Callie wagged. He did not know what that meant. Chapter 4. Eating as if there were no tomorrow. On bowls, needs, and the story behind hunger. Kale ate every meal as if it were a once-in-history opportunity. I eat as though someone important might be watching at any moment. That is no small difference. After all, eating is not merely the intake of food. Eating is posture, self-respect, timing. One takes a bite, assesses the texture, appreciates the aroma, and then decides whether the offering meets one's standards or whether the kitchen urgently needs to be made aware of its mistakes. Kale, on the other hand, threw himself at his bowl as if he had to put out a fire. It was Saturday morning. Anna had overslept. Tom was looking for his glasses, even though they were on top of his head. And Jewel was sitting at the kitchen table in front of a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. Her hair was still damp, and she was wearing that large dark green sweater I liked because it smelled like her and was especially good for kneading at the sleeves. Bowls clattered in the kitchen. That was usually the most important sound of the day. Anna placed my bowl on the mat by the window. She had served me chicken. Not the good chicken from the little cans with the picture of a contented cat on them. The other kind. The chicken advertised as having a new recipe, which for humans apparently meant we changed something even though no one asked us to. I approached the bowl, sniffed, and sat down. Anna waited. That was wise of her. She knew this stage was part of the process. I leaned down, took a small bite, and took my time. Behind me I heard Kale's claws on the tiles. He stood in front of his bowl, head lowered, ears forward. His tail thumped against the kitchen cabinet. Tom held his hand above him. "Wait," he said. Kale waited, his front paws, his hind paws, his nose, probably even individual hairs on his back. He kept his eyes fixed on Tom's hand, as if the fate of the world depended on that moment. "Okay." Kale pounced on his food. There was no other way to describe it. He did not eat. He practically disappeared headfirst into the bowl. His jaws worked in quick, determined motions. A few pieces fell beside it and were immediately collected. Then it was over. I had only just begun considering my third bite. Kale lifted his head. He looked into his bowl. Then he looked at Tom. Then he looked at me. His expression was devastating. He looked like a dog who had received nothing for weeks and had now happened to witness a privileged cat calmly insulting a buffet. "You had breakfast," Tom said. Kale wagged his tail. "It's gone," Jewel said. Kale wagged harder. Tom folded his arms. "That's the point." Kale took a step closer to Tom and deployed his look. It was not an ordinary look. Kale could turn his eyes into a story. A long, sad story about neglect and the cruel injustice of a house in which a dog did not immediately receive a second breakfast after finishing his first. He raised one eyebrow slightly. Then he lowered his head. His ears drooped. Even his tail went still. "Stop that," Anna said. Kale looked at her. Anna laughed despite herself. "You're not starving." "He has the figure of a sofa cushion with legs," Tom said. Kale sat down. Tom automatically reached into his pocket. I straightened up. "No," Anna said sharply. Tom froze with his hands still in his pocket. Kale watched him. Tom watched Kale. For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent. It was a duel between two creatures, both convinced the other would give in first. Then Tom pulled his hand back out. "Fine," he said. "No treat." Kale sighed. It was a deep, tragic sigh, one that filled the whole room and even made me briefly wonder whether I might have overlooked something. Perhaps his bowl had only appeared to be full. Perhaps the food had contained no nutritional value whatsoever. Perhaps Kale was, in truth, a very furry, very brown shadow who could only remain in this world through regular rewards. Then I noticed a single piece of kibble beside his bowl. Kale noticed it too. His tragedy ended immediately. With a speed that destroyed any emotional credibility, he bent down and ate it. "Aha," Anna said. Kale looked up. His face said, "What? I'm just cleaning up." Humans tended to underestimate Kale's abilities. He could not open door handles, had no concept of ownership, and considered the vacuum cleaner an evil machine. But in the realm of food, he possessed a determination that one could almost respect. Almost. I took the next bite from my bowl and spat it beside the mat. Anna noticed at once. "Cleo." I regarded the piece of food with matter-of-fact detachment. "She's not eating properly today," Jewel said. "She is eating," Anna said. "She just wants us to feel bad while she does it." That was outrageously accurate. I turned away and went to the window. Outside, the garden lay in the pale morning light. The grass was still wet from the rain of the previous days. A blackbird sat on the fence and acted as if the world belonged to it. I could have explained that property rights were more complicated than that, but it looked busy. Behind me, something rustled. Tom had opened a drawer. "Maybe she just doesn't like the new food," he said. "She doesn't like her old food either, once she realizes I still have 3 cans of it," Anna said. "We could get a different kind." Anna slowly turned toward him. "You want to drive to the store for a cat who is currently refusing chicken?" Tom thought for a moment. "They have those ones with salmon." I sat up straighter. Kale had meanwhile positioned himself beside Tom and was looking up at him. Presumably, he considered the mention of salmon an open invitation to conversation. "And I'll get Kale those training snacks," Tom added. "The duck ones. He likes those." Anna closed her eyes. "Tom." "What? Motivation is important." Kale wagged his tail. I looked at Tom, then at Anna, then at my bowl. Apparently I was difficult because I rejected food that tasted like a compressed compromise. Kale, meanwhile, received 3 varieties of treats because his motivation had to be maintained so that he would continue doing things he did without treats anyway. Sitting, waiting, bringing back the ball, following Tom out of the bathroom as if he might get lost without a dog. The system was illogical, but at least it was consistently illogical. Jewel stood up and went to her room. On the way, she paused beside me for a moment. She stroked my back slowly, from my shoulders to the base of my tail. "You can try again later," she said. I looked up at her. Her voice sounded kind but tired, not like in the weeks before. More and more often, she smelled of outside, of paper, of those cardboard boxes. There were 4 of them in her room now. 4 large brown declarations that something was about to change. Kalle followed her with his eyes. Then he went back to his empty bowl and licked around the rim. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked at my food. It was not inedible. It was merely mediocre. And mediocrity was no small matter when it came to food. Humans rarely understood that. They ate cold leftovers from plastic containers, drank coffee they had forgotten about, and called it everyday life. I took another bite. Kalle heard it. Immediately he was standing beside me. "Don't you dare," I said. Kalle sat down. "This is my breakfast." He lowered his gaze to my bowl. "You had yours." He looked at me. It was an open look. No tactic this time. No performance. Just hope. So great and uncomplicated that it was almost offensive. I placed one paw on the rim of the bowl. Kalle waited. "You will get nothing," I said. Kalle continued waiting, not because I am heartless, but because boundaries are important. Kalle blinked, and because otherwise you will never get used to the fact that not every wish is fulfilled. Then Anna came back into the kitchen, saw Kalle sitting beside my bowl, and immediately intervened. "No, Kalle, leave Cleo alone." Kalle stood up and walked 2 steps back, without argument, without the look, just like that. He lay down on his blanket in the living room, his head on his paws. His bowl was empty. The room was bright. From Jules' room came the sound of packing tape being pulled from a roll. Rip. I looked at my food, then at Kalle. He had not lifted his head, but his ears twitched at every sound from the kitchen. Whenever a bag rustled, a small tension ran through his back. Whenever Tom opened the refrigerator, Kalle lifted his head. When nothing came out for him, he put it back down. I was not the only one who noticed. Jewel came back. She sat on the floor beside Kalle and stroked his shoulder. "You don't always have to eat everything so fast," she said quietly. Kalle looked at her. "You'll get something again tomorrow, and tonight, and maybe later another biscuit if Dad isn't paying attention." At the word biscuit, his tail lifted slightly. Jewel smiled. Then she became serious again. "But you know that, right? You don't have to be afraid." Kalle laid his head on her leg. I remained standing beside my bowl, afraid. The words suddenly lay in the kitchen, like something that could not simply be wiped away. Before he had come here, Kalle had lived in other homes. I knew that. The humans sometimes told visitors about it, usually when Kalle had been especially friendly, and someone said what a sweet dog he was. "He had a hard time before," Anna would say. Or, "He was so thin when he came to us." Or, "We don't know exactly what happened." I had heard these sentences. But for humans, sentences were often merely objects they carried back and forth without ever really putting them down anywhere. Now I looked at Kalle, at his broad back, his large paws, the little white patch on his chest, his ears which perked forward at the rustle of bags. Maybe he did not eat that way because he was greedy. Maybe he ate that way because his body remembered times that were long gone, that bowls could stay empty, that doors could open and people could leave, that it was better to take what was there quickly because no one could promise it would still be there later. An unpleasant pressure formed behind my ribs. I didn't like that feeling. It was too large for a Saturday morning and too complicated for a discussion about food. So I sat down in front of my bowl and began solving the problem practically. I ate 2 more bites, then 3. I left the rest, not much, just enough that no one could say I had refused my breakfast, just enough that it looked like a sovereign decision. Kalle lifted his head. I walked past him without looking at him and jumped onto the windowsill. "The chicken was too soft anyway," I said. Kalle did not get up. Anna came into the kitchen, noticed what was left in the bowl, and was just about to take it away. "Leave it," Jewel said. Anna looked at her, then at the bowl, then at Kalle. "Just this once," she said. Kalle waited. Jewel snapped her fingers softly. Okay. Kala walked slowly to the bowl. Not like in the morning, not head first, not with his whole body. He sniffed first, then he took a bite. He chewed. He actually chewed. I watched him from the corner of my eye and pretended to be looking into the garden. After a few seconds, he looked up at me. His tail moved once across the floor. I gave the faintest nod. Don't make anything of it, I said. I never finish everything. It is a sign of refinement. Kale wagged his tail again. Of course, he did not understand that I owed him nothing, that I did not feel sorry for him, that I merely wanted to determine whether a dog who ate more slowly might look less as though he were fighting his bowl for the future. But he understood something else. He understood that I was not chasing him away. Apparently, that was enough. Jewel looked back and forth between us. A small smile appeared on her face, one that did not look tired. Chapter 5. The Ball, the Leash, and Unpaid Labor. On freedom, returning, and the strange pleasure of obedience. Tom threw the ball. Callie brought it back. Tom threw it again. After the third time, I ruled out a technical malfunction on either side. It was Sunday afternoon. The garden smelled of damp earth and the grass Tom had mowed yesterday, even though, in my opinion, it had been perfectly fine. Humans had a strange relationship with things that grew. The moment something reliably did what nature intended, they came along with machines and cut it shorter. I sat on the warm stone slab in front of the patio door. The sun only appeared occasionally between the clouds, but that was enough. A narrow strip of light lay across my back, and I had positioned myself precisely so that it ran from my shoulder all the way to the tip of my tail. Callie, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the lawn. Tom stood in front of him. Between them was a yellow ball. Tom raised his arm. Callie's entire body tensed. "Ready?" Tom asked. Callie was ready. Callie had probably been ready for 15 minutes. He had been ready when Tom got the ball out of the shed. He had been ready when Tom put on his shoes. He had even been ready while Tom was still looking for his phone in the hallway, running into the backs of his knees as he did so. Tom threw. The ball flew across the lawn, bounced once, twice, and briefly disappeared behind the lavender bush. Callie shot off. He ran as though the ball had stolen something valuable. His ears flapped, his paws sent little clumps of grass flying, and his tail stood above him like an exclamation mark. Then he found the ball. He took it in his mouth and brought it back to Tom, who threw it away again. I waited. Perhaps Callie would stop now. Perhaps he would look at the ball, then at Tom, then at me. Perhaps he would realize that an object a human threw away with such determination was clearly no longer wanted. Instead, he raced off. "That isn't normal," I said. Jewel sat on the patio step beside me. She had drawn up her knees, pulled the sleeves of her dark green sweater over her hands, and was watching Callie with that soft smile humans reserved for creatures who enjoyed themselves with absolutely no dignity. "He's having fun," she said. "He is performing unpaid labor. He's playing." That's what humans always claim when someone is doing something strenuous that makes no sense. Jewel laughed quietly. I watched Callie return for the fourth time. This time he briefly slipped on the wet grass, but caught himself again and placed the ball at Tom's shoes. Tom bent down, picked it up, and said, "Good boy." Callie sat down. Tom gave him a treat. I sat up straighter. "He isn't even rewarded for the actual work," I said. "He brings the ball back, and his payment is for sitting down afterward." "That is a highly questionable compensation system." Jewel gently nudged her shoulder against mine. Not hard. Just enough that I could have moved away if I had wanted to. I did not move away. "You wouldn't fetch the ball, would you?" she asked. I looked at her. "Of course not." "Not even once?" "If a human throws something away, I respect their decision." Jewel laughed again. Then for a moment, her gaze became distant. It drifted over the garden fence toward the street, and beyond the houses to the world that had occupied her so much lately. With her phone, her lists, and her boxes. Callie brought the ball back. Tom threw it again. It was a ritual, a completely pointless ritual, but one that brought them both joy. Tom threw. Callie ran. Tom praised. Callie beamed. Then it all began again. Suddenly, I understood why humans liked talking about work so much. Apparently, they had to repeat things in order to feel safe. They wrote lists, hung laundry up, took it down again later, and called it everyday life. They carried boxes into rooms, only to carry them out again eventually. They threw balls away and were pleased when they came back. Perhaps being busy was humans' way of avoiding thinking too long about what was changing. Callie, at any rate, did not think. He ran. And when, after the 7th throw, he stood in front of Tom with the ball in his mouth, he did not look tired. He looked happy. Not the way I was happy when a spot was warm enough and no one disturbed me. Differently, louder, with movement. That was difficult to criticize, so I criticized the leash. Later that afternoon, Tom took it down from the hook in the hallway. Callie immediately jumped up. He had been asleep before that, deeply and expansively, with a quiet snore that occasionally made his lips twitch. But the clink of the metal clasp was enough, and there he was, as though someone had flipped a switch in his back. "Walk," said Tom. Callie spun around once, then once more. His claws clicked on the tiles. He bumped his shoulder into the shoe cabinet, did not apologize, and gave Tom a look in which the whole world consisted of the front door, the path beyond it, and smells. Tom bent down and clipped the leash to Callie's collar. Callie wagged. I sat on the stairs and watched. "That," I said, "is truly remarkable." Callie looked up at me. "A rope is attached to you. You cannot decide where you go. You are not allowed to stop when you want to, and you have to keep walking when someone demands it. And you react as though you have been invited to a state banquet." Callie pulled lightly on the leash. Tom held him back. "Wait." Callie waited. I shook my head. They are excellent at marketing. They call restriction care, obedience cooperation, and leash time an adventure. Tom opened the door. Callie went outside. He did not go far. The leash would not allow that. But he walked with his head held high, his nose in the wind, full of anticipation for everything waiting beyond the garden gate. I watched him go. Then I looked at the open door. The garden was quiet. Anna was on the phone in the living room. Jewel was upstairs in her room, pulling tape from a roll. Rip, pause, rip, pause. The front door was still open a crack. It was not a plan, at least not at first. I walked down the stairs, slowly, inconspicuously, as though I had intended to check the temperature in the hallway anyway. Outside, the air smelled of rain, asphalt, and the distant roast of a neighbor who apparently began preparing for a meal as early as 5 o'clock. The garden fence was lower in one spot because Tom had meant to fix a loose slat there weeks ago, and then had been distracted by an email. Humans later called things like that unfortunate. I called it opportunity. With one leap, I was on the fence. The street looked bigger than it did from the window. Cars swept past, fast and shiny. A bicycle bell rang. Somewhere a mailbox clattered. There were smells I knew, and smells that immediately told me I would rather not get to know them. I could have gone back. Instead, I jumped down onto the other side. The pavement beneath my paws was cool. The sidewalk felt harder than the garden path. In front of the house across the street stood a trash bin that smelled of old paper, damp plastic, and other people's decisions. I took a few steps. No one held me back. No one said wait. No one set a boundary. I had to admit, it felt good. Freedom was pleasant, as long as it did not make too many noises. I stopped beside a hedge and sniffed. Not thoroughly like Callie, I had dignity. But the world outside the garden was full of information. A strange tomcat must have passed through here. 2, perhaps 3 dogs. A child with chocolate-covered fingers. A woman wearing perfume that smelled like flowers that would never voluntarily smell that way in nature. "Well, who do we have here?" I froze. Mrs. Kruger stood at the end of the path. Beside her was Hugo. Hugo was a poodle who looked as though he was regularly groomed by someone with too much time and strong personal opinions about curves. His fur was light gray and fluffy. He wore a dark blue coat, although it was not raining. There was no dirt on his paws. That was either discipline or a sign that he had never truly been anywhere. Mrs. Kruger held his leash loosely in her hand. "Isn't that the cat from next door?" she said. Hugo looked at me. He did not bark. He merely made a small, questioning sound that was so polite I distrusted him immediately. "You're quite far from home," said Mrs. Kruger. I drew my tail closer to myself. I was not far from home. I was exactly where I was. Humans had a strange idea that distance automatically meant danger. Perhaps that was because they hardly went anywhere without maps, keys, and their little glowing devices. Hugo took one step forward. His coat rustled. I took one step back. Not out of fear. I was merely assessing the diplomatic situation. "Hugo gets along with cats," said Mrs. Kruger. She said that often. Mrs. Kruger also claimed that Hugo understood every word and could sense when someone had bad energy. I suspected Hugo mainly understood the sound of cookie tins. Hugo sniffed in my direction. I hissed. Not loudly. Precisely. Hugo stopped. Mrs. Kruger raised her eyebrows. "Oh, well, the lady certainly has a mind of her own today." I looked at her. "Today?" Then I heard a sound behind me. An engine started. Not especially loud. A silver car was backing out of a driveway. Its tires crunched over gravel. The car moved slowly, but suddenly its size was everywhere. The sound, the smell, the blinking taillight, everything came at once. I jumped onto the low wall beside the hedge. My paws found their grip. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. Mrs. Kruger said something, but I did not listen. In that moment, I missed the garden. Not because it was bigger or more beautiful. It was smaller. That was precisely the point. There I knew every bush, every loose paving stone, every spot where the sun lingered longest. There I knew which sounds belonged to us and which did not. On the street there were no rules. I had thought that was freedom. Now I was no longer sure that rules and safety were always opposites. "Cleo," Callie's voice was unmistakable. Not a word, naturally. More of a bark, short and excited, somewhere between relief and reproach. I turned my head. Tom stood at the garden gate. The leash hung from his hand. Callie was at the other end, his body stretched forward, his nose held high in the air. His tail swung frantically back and forth. Tom crouched down. "Come on, Cleo." I stayed on the wall. It was important that no one thought I had gotten lost. Callie did not pull on the leash. He simply sat there and looked up at me. His ears were pointed forward, his gaze fixed on me. He did not look triumphant. He did not even look particularly surprised. More as though he had known that someday I would need to find out what the world felt like without offense. "I had everything under control," I said. Callie wagged. "The car was not a problem." Callie kept wagging. "And Hugo is simply overgroomed." Hugo made his polite sound. I jumped down from the wall and onto the garden path. Tom let out an audible breath. He said nothing. That was wise. Humans often talked too much when they were relieved. He simply opened the garden gate wider. Callie waited until I had gone through. Then he followed me. The leash clinked softly behind him. Inside, I jumped onto the windowsill in the hallway. My place, my height, my familiar world. Through the glass, I watched Callie and Tom standing outside for another moment. Tom knelt down beside Callie and stroked his head. "Good job," he said. Callie received a treat. Naturally. I wanted to protest. After all, Callie had done nothing more than stand excitedly at the garden gate with his nose in the air. On the other hand, he had found me. He had stayed. He had not barked until every neighbor was informed. For him, that was practically statesmanlike. So I said nothing. Calais came inside and looked up at me. I looked back. Between us was the leash, a piece of fabric and metal. To me, it was still a symbol of restricted movement. To Calais, apparently, it was the path to smells, streets, people, and the safety of not having to deal with everything alone. Perhaps freedom was not the same for everyone. Perhaps for Calais it did not mean being without a bond. Perhaps it meant setting out with the right ones. The thought was unpleasantly sensible. "You should not take that to mean I like leashes," I said. Calais sat down. "Or balls," he wagged. "Or this whole business of bringing things back." Calais tilted his head. I turned away and went into the living room. My cardboard box was still beside the couch. I jumped inside, turned around once, and lowered myself onto the bottom. Cardboard around me, familiar smells, an edge I could look over without being seen myself. Calais lay down beside the box. His back did not touch the outer wall. He kept his distance, just enough not to crowd me, just little enough for me to know he was there. I did not tell him that I noticed. He did not tell me that I had looked smaller outside than usual. Perhaps that was the beginning of a new rule between us. Then the toaster popped up in the kitchen. I shot out of the box, ran beneath the coffee table, and nearly hit my head on Tom's slipper. Calais only lifted his head briefly. He looked at me, and I immediately knew that the dog file required another highly unpleasant chapter. Chapter 6: Noise, Lasers, and Other Communication Failures. About toasters, red dots, and the art of being there. I am not easily startled. I merely react quickly to household appliances that violently eject bread. The toaster stood on the kitchen counter. It was silver, angular, and had been a quiet part of our household for years, which did nothing whatsoever to reduce its dangerousness. The inconspicuous things were often the worst. No one suspected a lamp. No one distrusted an electric kettle until it suddenly began to roar like a small volcano with a plug. But the toaster was honest. It waited. It got hot. And then, without warning, and for no comprehensible reason, it hurled 2 slices of bread into the air. That Sunday evening, I had forgotten. I had gone into the kitchen because Anna was putting cheese on a board. Cheese was not cat food humans like to claim. At the same time, they ate it so demonstratively in my presence that I considered it a form of psychological violence. I was sitting on the kitchen chair. Callie lay under the table, his head on his paws. Tom stood by the toaster, looking up a recipe on his phone for something called Quick and Easy, which already required 3 frying pans and a lemon. Jewel sat by the window. She had drawn her legs up onto the chair and held a mug in both hands. Her gaze rested on the garden, but she was not really looking outside. You could tell by now. When something was on Jewel's mind, she became quieter. Not as quiet as I was, of course. For me, silence was a deliberate form of presence. With Jewel, it seemed more like a room in which the furniture had been moved around. The toaster clicked. I heard it. My body heard it before I did. The muscles in my shoulders tightened. My ears turned forward. I could have left the kitchen chair in a perfectly controlled manner at any moment. Then the bread sprang up. I sprang up as well. Not vertically, which would have been undignified. Instead, I made an elegant sideways movement that carried me from the chair to the counter, directly beside the fruit bowl. A banana tipped over. A lemon rolled a short distance. I stood there, with my fur bristling, and stared at the toaster. The toaster stared back. At least, it looked as though it did. Under the table, Callie raised his head. He blinked. Then he looked at me. No barking, no jumping up, no frantic circling. He even yawned. "What?" I asked. Callie tilted his head. That was an attack. Tom turned around. "Cleo, it's all right. It's just the toaster." Just the toaster. Humans said just when they did not take something seriously. Just a noise. Just a box. Just a move. Just a cat standing on the counter because a machine had thrown bread. "She doesn't like the sound," Jewel said quietly. Her voice did not sound mocking. I liked that. Anna took the toast slices out and put them on a plate. But she knows the toaster does that. I sat down and began smoothing the fur on my chest. Knowing, I explained, is no guarantee of safety. Tom also knows his glasses are on his head, yet he regularly searches the entire house for them. Tom looked up. I wasn't looking for them. You were sitting on the sofa earlier and asking who had seen them last, Anna said. Tom fell silent. It was a small but important victory. Callie got up, stretched, and came out from under the table. He approached the counter as far as his size allowed and sniffed in my direction. His nose twitched. You don't have to pretend that nothing like this has ever happened to you, I said. Callie sneezed. You turned yourself into the shape of a carpet in front of the vacuum cleaner. That was correct. Callie had no dignity whatsoever in front of the vacuum cleaner. As soon as Anna or Tom brought the large black device up from the basement, his entire personality changed. The dog who enthusiastically threw himself into puddles became a creature who considered the world hostile and the hallway uninhabitable. The vacuum cleaner had wheels, a long hose, and a voice that sounded as if it were swallowing a small, desperate wind machine. Callie hated it. I had observed that on Friday. Anna had opened the basement door. Callie had been occupied with a chew when the familiar rattling came from the lower hallway. First he raised his head, then his ears went back. Finally, he abandoned the chew, which for Callie was roughly equivalent to a human giving up the last bite of cake. Anna pulled the vacuum cleaner into the living room. Callie disappeared. Not behind the sofa. That would have been too obvious. Not into the kitchen. There was no cover there. He ran into the hallway, slipped on the floorboards, turned around, and finally squeezed himself under Tom's desk. The desk was not a suitable place for a large dog. Callie apparently did not know that. His head and front paws fit underneath. His back did too if he made himself very small. His rear end, however, clearly stuck out. His tail lay on the floor and trembled with every vacuum cleaner noise. I sat on top of the bookcase in the living room, an excellent spot, safe, elevated, with a good view of the disaster. The vacuum cleaner could not reach me from there. It had a hose, yes, but no legs. That was its crucial weakness. Callie, Anna called over the roar. It won't hurt you. Callie looked at her from beneath the desk. That was human logic in its purest form. They put a machine into the room that roared, moved around, attacked furniture, and swallowed everything lying on the floor. Then they claimed there was nothing to fear because they were the ones holding the plug. I understood Callie's problem. Naturally, I did not say so. Instead, I sat up a little straighter on the shelf as the vacuum cleaner moved across the rug. It was important that Callie recognized how differently we handled crises. You see, I said, you only need to choose the right perspective. Callie let out a soft whimper. Anna switched the device off. At once, it was quiet. Callie crawled backward out from under the desk. He looked as though he had just returned from a long journey through very bad weather. Anna crouched down and reached out her hand to him. It's over, she said. Callie came closer hesitantly. She placed a hand on his back. Callie exhaled, once at first, then again, more deeply. His tail moved very slowly, as though it first had to remember that the world was safe again. From the bookcase I watched. I had expected him to be ashamed. After all, the vacuum cleaner was not an animal. It had no teeth. It was not even particularly intelligent. It mainly ate dust and occasionally a sock when humans were not paying attention. But Callie was not ashamed. He had been afraid. Now he was not anymore. That seemed to be enough for him. Humans often turned fear into a complicated subject. They explained it, judged it, hid it behind phrases such as, I'm just being careful, or that's completely irrational. Callie trembled when he trembled, and when it was over, he let himself be comforted. It was outrageously simple. On Sunday evening, I was still sitting on the counter while Callie settled back onto his blanket beneath the table. We simply have different lists of disasters, I said. Callie blinked slowly. The toaster is unpredictable. The vacuum cleaner is loud. Those are perfectly understandable assessments. Callie rested his head on his paws. I jumped down from the counter, this time in a controlled manner, and went into the living room. There. Jewel had left a small black box on the coffee table. I knew that box. It was harmless until it was not. "Cleo," Jewel called from the kitchen. "Come here." I did not come when called. I came because she was holding the box and because her voice sounded so gentle that evening that I decided to make an exception. Besides, Calais had followed behind me, not too close, just with that unobtrusive distance he had become better at keeping. Jewel sat down on the rug. "Want to play a little?" Tom carried plates to the table. Anna placed the frying pan on a trivet. No one paid any further attention to us. That was good. Important moments did not need an audience. Jewel pressed a small button. A red dot appeared on the floor. I froze. The dot was small, bright. It trembled briefly on the floorboards, then jumped onto the rug and darted under the armchair. All reasonable thoughts left me. I leaped. The red dot was faster than expected. It slid across the carpet, shot up the wall of books, and landed behind the curtain. I chased it. My paws slipped across the floor. I spun around, jumped again, caught nothing but fabric, and landed with all four paws on the rug. The dot had vanished. Then it appeared beside my tail. I whirled around. Calais sat at the edge of the living room and watched me. He looked at the dot. He sniffed. Then he looked at Jewel. The dot moved across his front paw. Calais lifted it briefly, as though an insect had touched him. Then he put it back down. Jewel laughed. "You don't find this exciting, do you?" Calais yawned. I jumped again. The dot raced across the floor, straight toward the box. My box was still beside the sofa, a little dented by now, but still of excellent quality. The red dot slid into it. I followed. With one leap, I landed in the box. The sides wobbled. Tape rustled beneath my paws. The red dot was gone. I looked left, right, up. Nothing. Jewel was still laughing, but she sounded lighter now. Truly lighter. For a few seconds, her face was not tense. She looked at me, and her shoulders dropped just a little. Then the red dot appeared on my front leg. I pounced on it. Calais made a short sound, not a bark, more of a surprised exhale. I paused. He sat in front of the box and looked at me as though I had suddenly joined a questionable cult. "You don't understand," I said breathlessly. Calais tilted his head. "It moves." He sniffed in the direction of the dot again. "It has no smell," I explained. "That is precisely what makes it challenging." Calais looked at Jewel, then at me. Finally he lay down. Apparently he considered the entire game a poor investment of his energy. That was his right. Not every creature had to understand that there were things you had to chase even though you could never catch them. Some humans chased promotions. Others chased the feeling of having everything under control. At least I was honest enough not to pretend the goal had some deeper meaning. Or perhaps it did. When Jewel switched off the laser, I remained sitting in the box for a moment longer. My breathing was faster. Calais lay in front of it. His head rested on the cardboard as though he were guarding the entrance to my kingdom. Jewel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you," she said. I looked up at her. "For what?" She did not answer. Humans sometimes did that. They said something that was not meant to receive an answer at all. Later, the doorbell rang. Calais barked. Of course Calais barked. He jumped up, raced into the hallway, and let out 3 powerful deep sounds that presumably informed the entire neighborhood that someone had dared to stand at our door. Anna called, "Calais, quiet." Tom called, "Go to your spot." Calais ran in a circle, barked once more, and then sat down on his blanket with great effort. I followed slowly. Mrs. Kruger stood at the door, Hugo on a leash. Hugo was not wearing a coat this time, but he had a red bow around his collar. I considered this proof that he had a difficult relationship with his own dignity. "I only wanted to bring the bowl back," Mrs. Kruger said, handing Anna a glass bowl. "And Hugo wanted to say hello." Hugo did not say hello. He looked toward the kitchen, where the cheese was. Despite all his barking, Calais wagged his tail. He could barely sit still. His entire body wanted to go to Hugo, to Mrs. Kruger, to the bowl, to the smell of the street, and probably also to the possibility that someone somewhere had a treat in their pocket. I sat down on the stairs. "You don't have to defend the house every single time," I said to him. Kale turned his head toward me. It was only Mrs. Kruger. He was no longer barking, but his eyes were alert. "And Hugo, who looks as though he has accidentally been decorated." Hugo sniffed indignantly. Mrs. Kruger smiled. "Your cat is talking to him again, isn't she?" "She always has far too much to say," Anna said. That was wrong. I said precisely enough. When the door closed again, Kale remained standing in the hallway for a moment. Then he came over to me on the stairs. He sat one step below me, so that his head was almost level with my paws. "You are loud," I said. Kale looked at me. "Very loud. You make noises before you know for certain whether something is important." Kale wagged his tail once. "But perhaps," I continued, "being loud is also a way of responding to something. You hear the world and want it to know that you are there." Kale rested his head lightly against my front leg. I stayed still. "I do it differently," I said. He knew that. I rarely meowed. Humans believed otherwise because they only remembered the moments when I did. At 5 in the morning, for example, when the kitchen was still closed and an urgent reminder of my needs was required. Or when there was a door between me and a room that clearly ought to have been open, my meow was not a sound, it was a decision. Kale, on the other hand, barked when someone arrived, when a delivery van stopped, when another dog walked past the fence, or when Tom sneezed in the garden. He had a great deal to communicate. Not all of it was necessary, but it was real. By evening, the house grew quieter. Tom cleaned up the kitchen and claimed he had everything under control, even though he had forgotten the lemon peel in the sink. Anna was talking to her sister on the phone. Kale slept on his blanket, one ear turned in my direction. Jules sat on the floor of her room. The door was open. I went in because I wanted to check whether the boxes were still in their places anyway. There were 5 by now. One was closed, and another had a stack of folded sweaters on top of it. The room still looked like Jules' room, but emptiness was beginning to form around the edges. Emptiness had no smell. Or perhaps it did. Perhaps it smelled of cardboard, dust, and things that were no longer where they belonged. Jules sat between 2 boxes and held her phone in her hand. The screen was dark. She was not looking at it. Her shoulders were drawn forward. Kale stood in the doorway. He walked slowly toward her. No barking, no wagging, no attempt to make her play. He simply sat down in front of her, looked at her, and then rested his head on her knee. Jules closed her eyes. Her hand moved over his ears. "You always notice, don't you?" she whispered. Kale exhaled. I remained standing in the doorway. I knew something was wrong too. I had noticed it in her voice, in the boxes, in the pauses between her sentences. But what were you supposed to do with that? Humans were large, complicated, and sometimes sad, without having a visible wound. Kale apparently had a simple answer. He stayed. Jules bent down toward him. Her forehead briefly touched his head. Kale did not move. After a while, I went to the stack of sweaters. The dark green one was on top. I jumped up, turned around once in a circle, and settled down on it. The fabric smelled like Jules, like tea, like rain in the air, like something I did not want to name. Jules opened her eyes and looked at me. A small smile appeared on her face. "You are both very nice to me today," she said. I closed my eyes. Kale wagged his tail once without lifting his head from her knee. Nice was an exaggerated word. We were simply there, but perhaps that was sometimes more than words could say. Later, I heard Tom say in the hallway, "See? Kale did well with Jules. The training is paying off." I opened one eye. Kale had not done anything on command. He had not expected a reward. No sit, no down, no treat. He had simply understood that Jules needed him. Tom was good at many things: spreadsheets, grilling, losing his glasses. but sometimes he confused obedience with everything that made a creature valuable. I pressed my palm more firmly onto Jules' sweater. The dog file had to be revised. Not completely, of course. Kale was still loud. He ate too quickly, regarded balls as important tasks, and had less composure in front of a vacuum cleaner than a folded towel. But he knew when he had to stay. And I reluctantly realized that was not a skill you could teach with treats. Chapter 7. Sit, Down, Personality. On commands, boundaries, and the value of a good disobedience. People especially love commands when they don't have to carry them out themselves. Sit, Tom said. Callie sat. Down, Callie lay down. Stay, Callie stayed. Tom stood in the garden, with a treat pouch around his waist, and the expression of a man who believed he had just demonstrated the foundations of a functioning society. The sun hung low above the fence. Long shadows stretched across the lawn, and I sat on the garden wall, in a spot I had declared the official spectator stand for the duration of the event. Jules sat on the terrace step. Beside her stood 2 boxes Tom had carried out of her room into the hallway that morning. One was labeled books. The other said kitchen stuff, which from my perspective was a disturbingly imprecise category. Kitchen stuff could mean anything: bowls, cups, can openers, things I urgently needed to inspect before they left the house. But first, there was another spectacle. Tom raised a finger. Stay, he said again. Callie lay on the grass. His gaze was fixed on Tom, not out of fear, not even mainly because of the treats, although those naturally played a part. Callie looked at Tom as though staying right there was an important task. Tom took 3 steps backward. Callie stayed down. 4 steps. Callie stayed down. 5 steps. A blackbird landed in the flower bed. Callie's ears twitched. Tom saw it. I saw it. The blackbird probably saw it too, but it had that smug attitude birds develop when they believe their small size is compensated for by volume. Callie stayed down. Very good, Tom said. Callie's tail thumped once against the grass. Excellent. Stay. I moved my front paws a little farther over the edge of the wall. He's lying there, I said. We all do that regularly. I've been lying down since breakfast, with brief interruptions. Where is my praise? Jules smiled in my direction. You never stay when someone tells you to. That is an accusation. Cleo, I stay very often, on windowsills, on beds, in boxes, on freshly folded laundry. I even stay on Tom's newspaper when he wants to read it. Tom turned around. That's not the same thing. Of course it is. The only difference is that I decide the timing myself. That's called self-government. Callie glanced briefly at me. His gaze moved back and forth between Tom and me. He was probably wondering why I was spending so much energy criticizing an exercise that clearly made him happy. It was a fair question. I ignored it. Tom walked back to Callie and bent down. Okay. Callie jumped up. Good boy. The treat disappeared into Callie's mouth before Tom had fully pulled his hand back. Callie wagged so hard that a blade of grass got stuck to his ear. He didn't notice. He was too busy being happy. Jewel raised her phone. That was really good. Callie immediately sat down again. He's already offering it on his own. I closed my eyes briefly. It was remarkable how little Callie needed to reach a state of deep satisfaction. A word, a look, a piece of dried duck. He worked with an enthusiasm that humans usually only displayed when someone ordered pizza or a meeting was canceled. Come here, Jules suddenly said. I opened one eye. She had risen from the terrace step and held something between her thumb and forefinger. Not a treat. Something small and crinkly. A piece of my favorite snack which only appeared when Anna said I was so cute today. As though I had not reliably demonstrated that quality for years. Jewel knelt on the lawn. Cleo, come here for a moment. I did not jump down immediately. It was important that she understood an invitation was not an order. "What are you planning?" I asked. "Just a little experiment." In principle, I liked the word experiment. It had something scientific about it, something that promised competence. Still, I was cautious. Humans also use the word when trying out new cat litter or claiming that a houseplant would definitely grow back. "You could learn sit too," Tom said. I stared at him. Then I stared at Jewel. Then at the piece of snack. "I know sit," I said. Tom laughed. "Then show us." There are sentences that create unnecessary tensions in a family. That was one of them. I jumped from the wall onto the garden table. From there onto the chair. From the chair onto the terrace railing. Finally, I sat upright, my tail neatly curled around my paws. "There," I said. Jewel laughed. "That doesn't count. You're supposed to do it when I say so." "Why?" "Because that's the trick." "Then it isn't a trick. It's administration." Tom walked over to Calais and scratched his chest. "Calais just understands teamwork." Calais wagged. I looked at him. Teamwork. Humans like to use that word when they wanted someone to take on a task they did not want to do themselves. Packing boxes, doing the dishes, carrying heavy bags, running after a ball. And sometimes, I had to admit, teamwork simply meant doing something together because both parties liked it. Calais liked Tom's exercises. Probably not every single one. Drop it was clearly less appealing to him than take it. Stay demanded a patience that did not always fit his body. But when Tom spoke to him, paid attention to him, and praised him, Calais grew bigger with happiness. Not physically. He was already big enough. But inside he straightened up as though someone had told him that he was right. I did not know that feeling particularly well, or rather, I knew it, but I did not need commands for it. When Jewel sat down beside me without immediately wanting to touch me. When Anna put a blanket over my side of the couch in winter. When Tom got up because I claimed the very chair he was sitting in. Those were forms of recognition. Quieter perhaps, more sensible. But I liked it too when someone noticed what I needed. The thought was so unpleasant that I decided to take the snack after all. Purely for strategic reasons. I jumped onto the terrace step. Jewel held it out to me. "Sit," she said. I looked at her. I understood every element of the situation. Her hand, the food, the word, the expectation in her eyes, the small pause in which she hoped I would do something. I did not sit. Instead, I lifted my left paw and touched her hand. Jewel smiled. "Almost." "Not almost," I explained. "Differently. You really are a cat. That has been confirmed several times." She gave me the snack anyway. Tom shook his head. "You're rewarding her even though she didn't do the command." Jewel stood up. She understood what I wanted. But she didn't do it. Maybe she wanted to do something else. Tom looked as though he had to think about that sentence first. I took the snack, chewed slowly, and looked at Calais. He stood next to Tom, his tongue slightly out, his eyes alert. I wondered whether he liked obeying because he liked to please, whether he wanted to please Tom because he loved him, or whether he simply enjoyed being able to do something that visibly made people happy. Maybe the answer was not just one thing. Humans like simple explanations. Calais obeyed because of treats. Cleo contradicted people because she was stubborn. Jewel was quiet because she was tired. Tom needed rules because rules created order. But no creature fit entirely into one sentence, not even Calais. Tom pulled another snack from his pouch. "Again, big guy. Stay." Calais lay down. Tom stood in front of him. "Stay." Then he walked backward across the lawn. This time I watched Calais more closely. His paws were tucked neatly beneath his body. His ears were attentive. His eyes followed Tom, but as Tom moved farther away, Calais' gaze briefly shifted to Jewel. She was still standing on the terrace. Her phone vibrated in her hand, a sound very quiet. But Jewel flinched. She looked at the display. Her face barely changed. That was the difficult thing about humans. Sometimes everything happened in their faces, without becoming clear enough for anyone else to see. A slight tightening around the mouth, a look that was no longer in the garden, a hand closing more tightly around the phone. She walked a few steps away. "I have to take this," she said. Anna opened a window inside the house. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Jewel called back too quickly. Then she answered the call. "Hello?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. Tom glanced at her, then back at Kale. "Stay." Kale stayed. Jewel walked as far as the garden gate. She turned her back to us. Her shoulders were tense. The wind moved a loose strand of hair across her cheek. "No," she said into the phone. "I just thought—" "Yes, of course. I understand." A pause. Tom waited. Kale waited. I did not wait. I stood on the terrace step and felt something in the air shift. Not loudly, not visibly, but it was there. "No," Jewel said again. This time her voice was no longer calm. She turned slightly away, as though sadness could be hidden if you just chose the right direction. Her free hand rose to her face. She stopped speaking. Then she breathed in, and that breath broke in the middle. Kale jumped up. Tom immediately said, "Kale, stay." Kale paused, only for a moment. He looked at Tom, then at Jewel. Tom stood on the lawn with his hand outstretched. The treats rustled in his pouch. The exercise was clear. The command was clear. Stay meant stay. Kale went anyway. Not quickly, not wildly. He did not run, bark, or wag his tail. He simply walked across the lawn, past Tom, straight to Jewel. "Kale," Tom said. Kale heard him. You could see it. His ears twitched, but he kept going. Jewel had lowered the phone by then. She stood at the garden gate, crying quietly, not dramatically. Humans rarely cried the way they did in films. Usually they tried not to cry at the same time. That probably made it more exhausting. Kale sat down in front of her. Jewel looked down. He lifted his head and pressed his muzzle against her hand. She knelt down. The phone was still in her other hand. Kale licked her fingers once. Then he simply stayed there, very close, his warm back against her knees. Jewel wrapped both arms around his neck. Kale did not move. Tom was still standing on the lawn. His face had first been stern, then surprised. Finally, it softened in a way I rarely saw in him. He lowered his hand. "It's okay," he said quietly. Not to Kale, perhaps to himself. Anna stepped out onto the terrace. She saw Jewel by the garden gate, Kale beside her, and Tom on the lawn. She did not immediately ask what had happened. That too was a skill. Sometimes you did not need to attack every feeling with questions. She simply went to Jewel and placed a hand on her shoulder. For a while, nobody said anything. I sat on the terrace step. The garden was the same as it had been 10 minutes earlier. The grass, the wall, the blackbird, which had disappeared by then. The 2 boxes beside me. And yet everything felt different, as though someone had opened an invisible door. Kale had broken a command. He had chosen against a treat, against praise, against the task Tom had given him, for Jewel. When she finally stood up again, Jewel wiped her cheek and smiled at Kale. It was not a big smile, but it was real. "You're a good dog," she said. Kale's tail moved slowly. Tom came over to them. He crouched down and placed his hand on Kale's back. "Yes," he said, "you are." Kale looked at him. Tom pulled a treat from his pouch. I was about to protest. Reflex, principle, scientific consistency. Then Tom paused. He put the treat away again. Instead, he scratched Kale behind the ears for a long time. Kale leaned into his hand. It was probably the first time Tom understood that not everything Kale did was a training achievement. Perhaps he did not understand it completely. Humans sometimes needed several repetitions before a truth reached them. But he had seen it. That was a beginning. Later, Kale came to me on the terrace. I was sitting on the wall again, because height was useful in emotionally confusing situations. He stood beneath me and looked up. "You broke the command," I said. Kale did not wag his tail. That was disorderly. He lowered his head slightly, and right. Kale looked at me. I cleared my throat, not because I had choked on anything. It was merely a physical reaction to an unusually direct statement. A good dog, I finally said, is apparently not always the one who obeys. Calais sat down. Sometimes a good dog is the one who knows when a rule matters less than a person. His tail thumped once against the terrace step. I looked away. That does not mean you are now allowed to wander off everywhere when Tom says stay. We do not need anarchy. Humans are already overwhelmed by ordinary daily life. Calais wagged a little harder, and don't get carried away. Naturally, he did anyway. That evening I lay on the couch. Anna had pushed the boxes farther against the wall in Jules' room, so it was easier to walk through. The room suddenly looked bigger and at the same time, less like a room. Jules had closed the door, not completely, just enough to leave a narrow gap. Calais lay on his blanket. He was not asleep. His eyes were half closed, but one ear twitched at every sound from the hallway. I looked at him. Then I looked at the empty piece of couch beside me. It was not large. Calais was large. Those were facts that could not be wished away. I jumped from the middle cushion onto the armrest, stretched, and sat there. The space beside me was now free. Calais lifted his head. I did not look at him. 7 seconds, I said. Calais stood up. He walked over to the couch, hesitated, looked at Anna, who was in the kitchen, at Tom, who was looking at his phone, then at me. Only 7, I said. And if you breathe like a tractor, the agreement is over. Calais carefully placed his front paws on the couch and pushed himself up. This time he landed more quietly. He did not lie exactly beside me, more at the edge. His back almost touched the cushion I was sitting on. He stayed still, so still that for a moment I thought he might actually be capable of learning. 1 second, 2, 3. At 4 he sighed. At 5 his hind leg twitched in the beginning of sleep. At 6 he opened one eye. At 7, I jumped up. Calais got up too and went back to his blanket. He did not look disappointed. That was almost the worst part. He looked content. I sat down again on the middle cushion and pulled my tail over my paws. The dog file required a correction, not a comprehensive one. One could not abandon scientific standards because of a single emotional scene. Calais was still easily bribed, called Wet Meadows Adventures, and thought it was sensible to bring back objects humans had deliberately thrown away. But he was not simply obedient. He was attentive, and sometimes when it mattered, he had more personality than all the rules in this house put together. Chapter 8. The world is full of suspicious smells, of noses, memories, and the scent of farewell. Calais reads smells the way other people read the news. The difference is that his news is usually posted on a lamppost. For a long time, I had considered this a regrettable limitation of his mind. Anyone who voluntarily pressed his nose against things where other dogs left their personal messages could not possibly be thinking very sophisticated thoughts. But by now, I had to admit that Calais had access to information that escaped me. Not that I had told him so. One had to acknowledge differences without immediately questioning the entire natural order. That Monday morning, Calais stood in front of Jules' bedroom door and sniffed. Not briefly, not politely. He conducted a full investigation. His nose moved along the doorframe, over the carpet, past the boxes, and finally toward the open suitcase standing in the middle of the floor. The suitcase was dark blue, had 4 wheels, and smelled of fabric, dust, and something unfamiliar. Outside, perhaps, like an apartment that did not yet smell like Jules. I sat on the windowsill and watched him. "You do know the suitcase isn't going to run away," I said. Calais kept sniffing. "And that there isn't any sausage inside it." He paused, looked at me, and put his nose back into the suitcase. It was a frightening form of persistence. Jules' room had changed. The bookshelves were almost empty. On the desk stood only a lamp, a notebook, and a mug with a dried tea bag inside. The bed had been stripped. The familiar blanket with the little yellow dots lay folded on top of a box. Every object suddenly seemed less self-evident. I did not like that. Things were supposed to stay in their places. A sweater belonged over a chair. Books belonged on shelves until someone needed them to lie on. Jules' bag belonged beneath the window. And Jules belonged in this room, especially in the evenings when she talked on the phone with the door half closed or listened to music too quietly to judge properly. Callie pushed his snout deeper into the suitcase. Then he sat down in front of it. His ears hung loosely. His gaze rested on the open lid. "You look as though you've discovered something," I said. He looked up at me. "Well, what does it say?" Callie made a quiet sound, not a bark, more like a deep rumble in his throat, as though the answer were too large for a single noise. I jumped from the windowsill onto the box beside the bed. The cardboard gave slightly beneath my paws. It was a good box, sturdy, spacious, with 2 cutout handles. Unfortunately, written on the outside in thick black letters were the words, "Jewel Living Room." I had read the label several times. I did not like it. "People always pack too much," I said. "That's surely all this is. They move a few things around so they can later remember where they were." He went to Jewel's sweater hanging over the desk chair and pressed his nose against it. Then he sat down again. I looked away. It was rude to stare at objects as if they could explain something to you. Shortly afterward, Jewel came in. She was carrying 2 cloth bags and a paper bag that smelled of fresh bread. Callie jumped up, spun around once, and greeted her with an enthusiasm entirely out of proportion to her absence. She had been gone for maybe 20 minutes. "Hello, you lunatic," she said, crouching down. Callie pressed his head against her shoulder. Jewel laughed. Then she remained sitting there for a moment. Her arms were around his neck. Her face was buried in his fur. Callie grew quiet. I watched them from the box. It was one of the things I understood least about him, and had gradually found hardest to mock. Callie greeted people as if each of them had returned from a long, dangerous journey. He made no distinction between 10 minutes, 2 hours, or an entire afternoon. Closeness was closeness. Seeing someone again was seeing someone again. I, on the other hand, preferred an appropriate culture of greeting. When Anna came home, I looked up briefly. If she had brought something edible, I accompanied her into the kitchen. If not, I waited to see whether her presence lasted longer than necessary. I occasionally made an exception for Jewel. Even then, though, I thought it sensible to check from a safe distance whether she smelled of rain, strangers, or another woman's perfume. Callie sniffed everything immediately: shoes, bags, trouser legs, hands. Once, he examined Tom so thoroughly after he returned from the hardware store that Tom said, "I only went to buy screws, Callie." Callie had looked at him as though that were hardly believable. "He likes knowing where everyone has been," Jewel said now, stroking his back. "He's controlling," I said. "He's curious. That's what people claim about anyone who doesn't respect boundaries." Jewel looked up at me. "You've been sitting on my box for half an hour. I'm testing its stability." "With your entire body?" "That is the most thorough method." Jewel smiled. But then she looked around the room, and the smile faded again. Not completely. Only at the edges. Callie noticed. He sat down in front of her. I noticed too. And because I did not want to comment further, I began cleaning my paw. That afternoon, Mrs. Kruger came by. She rang the bell twice, as if once had not been enough, and stood at the door with Hugo. Hugo was not wearing a coat. Instead, his fur had been trimmed so carefully that he looked as though someone had shaped him out of a cloud and then equipped him with too much self-confidence. Callie heard the bell and barked immediately. Once, twice, 3 times. He ran into the hallway, his claws clicking against the floor, his tail striking the wall. Anna called from the kitchen, "Callie, calm down." Callie did not calm down. He merely became loud a little farther down the hallway. I sat on the stairs and waited. Greetings were a difficult matter. People claimed to be happy to receive visitors. Then they complained that someone came too early, stayed too long, or wore the wrong shoes in the house. Animals were more honest. Callie was always happy. I decided later. "Oh, he's excited again," Mrs. Kruger said as Anna opened the door. Callie tried to sniff Hugo. Hugo tried to remain dignified. Both succeeded only partly. "Hugo has just been to the dog groomer," Mrs. Kruger explained. "You can tell he always feels especially well-groomed afterward." Hugo looked toward the kitchen. I suspected he mostly felt especially underfed. His side, his paws. Hugo stepped back. not offended, more professionally exhausted. Kale, let Hugo breathe, Anna said. Kale sat down. Hugo gave himself the faintest shake. He was at the park today, Mrs. Kruger said. He played with a golden retriever lady, absolutely lovely. And then there were those two young dogs who are always so wild. Kale listened, not to the words, to the smells. His nose twitched, his eyes grew wide. Mrs. Kruger was telling the version for people, but Kale was already reading the more detailed account in Hugo's fur. Park, earth, strange dogs, water, perhaps a biscuit Hugo had not been given but would have liked to have. I found that disproportionately intimate. You don't have to know everything about everyone else, I said. Kale looked at me. A good first impression is enough. I retreated one step higher. And distance is the beginning of every successful acquaintance. Mrs. Kruger smiled. Cleo has a lot to say again today. Anna nodded. She's a little sensitive because of the boxes. I froze. Because of the boxes. As if I were a creature that reacted to change with sensitivity. As if I had not already established that these boxes mainly suffered from poor placement and regrettable labeling. She can tell that something is changing, Anna continued. Jules stood in the hallway behind her. For a moment, her eyes met mine. I looked away, not out of guilt. I merely had to observe Hugo, who was currently investigating Tom's shoes with his nose. When Mrs. Kruger finally left, peace returned to the house. Kale lay in the hallway and kept sniffing the place where Hugo had stood for a while. Then he came into the living room and found me on the sofa. I was lying on Jules' dark green sweater. It did not belong there. The sweater was soft, warm, and smelled like her. Those were objective reasons. No further questions. Kale came up to the sofa and sniffed. No, I said immediately. He looked at me. That is not an invitation. He sniffed the sweater once more. Then he sat down. You don't have to solve every feeling with your nose, I said. Kale tilted his head. Some things are simply there, even if you can't smell them. He got up and went to the garden window. Outside it had become dry. A mild wind moved the branches of the forsythia. An old ball Tom had forgotten the day before lay on the lawn. Kale did not look at it. That was unusual. Later, as Anna was preparing dinner, Kale did something everyone noticed immediately. He went into Jules' room. He circled the suitcase. Then he lay down directly in front of it. Not beside it, in front of it. His front paws rested on the dark fabric. His head lay on the zipper. Jules stood in the doorway. Kale, she said softly. He did not lift his head. Anna passed behind her and stopped. Oh, that single word was full of things people otherwise did not say. Tom came out of the study. He saw Kale, the suitcase, Jules. Then he took off his glasses, although this time they were actually on his nose. He knows, Jules said. No one answered at once. I sat on the hallway shelf because the situation called for height. He knows. The sentence was ridiculous. Kale did not know how to open a drawer. He did not know why Tom put the same stack of papers on the dining table every Tuesday and was in a bad mood afterward. He did not even know that one was not absolutely required to bring a ball back. And yet he lay in front of Jules' suitcase as though there were something inside it he did not want to let go. I'll come back, Jules said. At last, Kale lifted his head. I'm not leaving the world. His tail moved once. Jules stroked his forehead. Tomorrow morning, we're taking the last things over. And then, yes, then I'll sleep there. Tomorrow morning. The words did not hit me immediately. They fell into the hallway like small, hard objects. Tomorrow, morning, last things, there. I looked at the suitcase, the boxes, the empty shelves behind Jules. Suddenly everything made a sense I had not wanted. The new smells on her hands, the tape, the bags, the conversations that stopped whenever someone entered the room, the emptiness spreading across the walls of her room. Jules was not getting new boxes. Jules was leaving. A pressure spread through my chest. It felt like hunger, except that no food in the world could have helped against it. That is impractical, I said. No one reacted. I spoke louder, completely impractical. Jewel looked up at me. Her eyes became glossy. She smiled anyway. "Yes, Cleo," she said. "You probably think so." As if she did not know that I slept on her bed every night when she was staying with friends. As if she had not noticed that I preferred her sweaters and always lay on her books whenever she was trying to study. As if she were just some person who had happened over the years to scratch my forehead, straighten my favorite blanket, and never force her presence on me. I jumped down from the shelf, not toward her. I walked past her into her room, jumped into the largest open box and curled up. The cardboard smelled of paper and Jewel, of the room, of what was supposed to leave. Calais came after me. He stood in front of the box. I closed my eyes. "Go away." Calais stayed. "I mean it." He sat down. I could hear him breathing. Slow, warm, patient. "You don't understand," I said into the darkness of the box. Calais made no sound. "She can't leave. That is not a good rule. Nobody asked me." The box crackled softly as I shifted. Calais lay down in front of it. His back rested against the cardboard, just enough that I could feel him. I could have sent him away. I could have hissed, growled at him, or simply jumped out of the box and driven him from my territory with a look. But I did none of those things. Outside in the hallway, Anna spoke quietly with Tom. Jewel said something I did not understand. Dishes clattered in the house. The heating came on. Somewhere, a car drove past. Everything was as it always was, and nothing was as it always was. Calais lay in front of my box. Apparently he had read the scent of farewell long ago. I had understood it only when it was too late. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I crept out of the box, went into Jewel's room, and jumped onto her desk. Beside the lamp lay a set of keys. There was a new key on it. Small, silver, unfamiliar. I sat in front of it and studied it. People could change an astonishing amount by allowing a piece of metal to open a door. I looked toward the bedroom door, then back at the key. If Jewel could not find her apartment key tomorrow morning, she would not be able to leave. That was not sabotage. It was a necessary review of the moving logistics. Chapter 9. The Great Box Plan. Of Keys, Bad Decisions, and the Limits of Control. I didn't want to prevent the move. I merely wanted to make sure it took place under technically impossible conditions. That was an important distinction. Sabotage was destructive, impulsive, and usually associated with people who shoved things into drawers that were obviously too small. My plan, on the other hand, was precise, inconspicuous, temporary. Jewel would not find her key. Without a key, she could not get into the new apartment. Without access to the new apartment, she could hardly sleep there. And if she could not sleep there, she would stay here. It was not imprisonment. It was logistics. I sat on her desk and looked at the key ring. Next to the new silver key hung a small wooden charm shaped like a house. In black letters it said, "Home." Humans liked things like that. They wrote words on objects because apparently they feared the objects might otherwise forget what they meant. I touched the key with one paw. It was cold. Then I carefully took the ring between my teeth. Metal tasted unpleasant, but big decisions were rarely pleasant. The keys jingled softly. I froze. Nothing moved in the hallway. From Anna and Tom's bedroom came the steady, distant sound of snoring. Calais was probably lying on his blanket in the living room. He did not always snore, but when he did, it sounded as though someone had put a small saw inside a pillow. I waited. Nothing. So I jumped from the desk onto the box beside it. The box stood open. A white label on its rim read, "Books, Decor, Odds and Ends." Odds and ends. Humans had a disturbing habit of calling things important to them odds and ends as soon as they could not find a better category. Inside this box were Jewel's old concert tickets, a photo album, a picture frame containing a dried flower, and 3 books she had not read in months but had not given away either. A place for keys, I decided. I pushed the key ring between a scarf and a thick book with a pale blue cover. Then I pulled the scarf over it until no metal was visible. Perfect. I sat on the edge of the box and examined my work. Sometimes humans had to be protected from themselves. They made decisions, wrote lists, packed suitcases, and claimed everything was fine. Yet they overlooked the essential thing. A house was not simply made of rooms. It was made of smells, voices, habits. Of the sound Jewel made when she walked barefoot down the hallway at night. Of her sweater on the armchair. Of the way her foot bounced when she was reading. You could not pack that into boxes. And you could not simply leave it behind. Cleo? I spun around. Kale stood in the doorway. In the dark he seemed larger. His ears hung loosely, but his gaze was alert. He had heard me. Of course he had heard me. Dogs never truly slept when something in the house was wrong. They merely lay there with their eyes closed and waited for someone to make a mistake. You should be asleep, I said. Kale took a step into the room. His nose twitched. I stood wide-legged on top of the box. Don't sniff. Kale sniffed. This is private. He sniffed again, this time directly at the box. Then he looked at me. His expression was not accusatory. That was almost unbearable. He only looked confused. Perhaps sad, too. As though he could not understand why I wanted to hide something Jewel needed. She's leaving, I said quietly. Kale sat down. And you're lying in front of her suitcase, pretending that's an appropriate reaction. Kale lowered his head. You're right. It isn't appropriate. None of this is appropriate. I jumped from the box onto the desk. My paws barely made a sound. But if she can't leave, she'll stay. Just a little longer. Maybe then she'll realize the new apartment is too small, or too quiet, or that she didn't take a box with her that was actually good enough. Kale stood up. He came closer and rested his muzzle against the edge of the box. I hissed, not loudly, but sharply enough that he stepped back. At once, I felt bad. That was annoying. Kale had done nothing. He had not betrayed me. He had not scolded me. He had not even made that stupid, friendly face he put on whenever I was being unreasonable. He had only stood there. And he knew. Of course he knew. His nose had smelled the key. Perhaps even my paws on it. Perhaps he smelled something else too. Fear, for example. If Kale was truly so good at reading humans and dogs and cats, then perhaps fear smelled to him like rain in the air. Invisible, but unmistakable. Go, I said. Kale stayed. Kale, he looked at me for another moment. Then he turned around and slowly walked out. I remained on the desk. The box stood there like a silent accomplice. The next morning began with a scream. Where is my key? Jewel's voice came from the hallway. Not loud enough to mean panic, but distinctly louder than her voice usually was in the morning. I opened one eye. I was already lying on the box with the books. Naturally, not directly on the spot where the key was hidden. That would have been unprofessional. I lay slightly off to the side, my tail draped over the edge, wearing the expression of a creature that had done nothing but sleep for hours. The house was full of movement. Anna hurried from the kitchen into the hallway and back again. Tom stood by the shoe rack with a cup of coffee in his hand, looking as though he hoped the key would come forward on its own out of a sense of responsibility. Jewel searched her jacket pockets, then her handbag, then the same jacket pockets again. I had it on my desk last night, she said. Maybe it fell down, Anna said. Maybe it's in a pocket, Tom said. I searched all the pockets. Tom nodded seriously, as though she had just confirmed an important investigative method. Then he began opening a note on his phone. I'll make a list, he said. Anna looked at him. Tom, we're looking for a key, not conducting a tax audit. Lists help. You look for your glasses with lists. Tom touched his forehead. His glasses were not there. This time he had actually misplaced them. That's not helpful right now, he muttered. Kale stood in the middle of the hallway. He was unusually quiet. Normally the general excitement would have swept him up. He would have run back and forth among everyone, sniffed bags, perhaps found a sock and declared it relevant. But now he only looked at me. I looked back. Then I deliberately turned toward the window. Outside the sky was bright. A moving day morning, The street in front of the house was wet from the night's rain. Tom's car stood in front of the garden gate. 2 more boxes waited beside it. The move was ready. Only the key was missing. A small triumph spread through me. It did not feel as good as I had expected. Jewel went back into her room. Her steps were quick. Too quick. She pulled open drawers, shoved them shut, picked clothes up from the floor and dropped them again. "I don't understand," she said. Anna came in behind her. "Take a breath first." "I am breathing." "You're breathing like someone who is about to insult a piece of furniture." "I just want to get going." The sentence remained in the room. I just want to get going. Not, I want to leave. Not, I have to go. Just get going. But that did not make it any better. Kale entered Jewel's room. He did not go to her. He went to the box. To my box. His nose moved over the floor. Over the edge. Over the scarf beneath my stomach. I sat up straighter. "What?" Callie gave a soft snort. He nudged the box with his nose. "No." He nudged it again. "You can't just point at things that are none of your business." Callie sat down. Jewel turned toward us. Her eyes were red, not because she had cried a lot, more because she had been trying not to. "What is it, Callie?" she asked. Callie stood and pushed his nose against the box once more. My heart beat faster. This was betrayal. It was not even particularly subtle betrayal. I jumped off the box, not because I wanted to flee. I had merely decided to assess the situation from a different perspective. Unfortunately, I landed on the scarf, which I caught with one hind paw as I jumped. The scarf slipped. The book beneath it slid aside. And with a bright, treacherous jingle, the keyring fell onto the wooden floor. No one said anything. The key lay between the book and Jewel's shoe. The little wooden house-shaped charm spun in a circle once and came to rest. Home. Jewel looked at the key, then at me, then at Callie. Callie did not look particularly proud. His tail was not wagging. He even seemed almost apologetic, as though he had not found a key, but a truth none of us wanted to see. Tom appeared in the doorway. "There it is," he said in relief. Anna exhaled. "Oh, thank goodness." Jewel slowly crouched down. I sat on the floor. Running away would have been pointless. Besides, it would have looked cowardly, and I already had enough to do trying to salvage my dignity from the ruins of my plan. Jewel picked up the key. She held it in her hand, but said nothing. Then she reached the other hand toward me. I did not pull away. It was not a conscious decision. My body simply remained still. Jewel gently picked me up and pressed me against her chest. Her sweater smelled of coffee, cold air, and that new scent that no longer belonged only to our house. "You little catastrophe," she said softly. Her voice trembled a little. I placed my paws against her sweater. Normally, I allowed myself to be carried for only a few seconds at most. After that, it was important to make my position clear through a controlled push away. This time, I stayed. "You didn't want me to go, did you?" she whispered. I closed my eyes. That was an outrageously direct thing to say. Behind us, Callie made a soft sound. Jewel looked over at him. "And you found it." Tom patted Callie's side. "Good boy." Of course, Callie got a treat. Under ordinary circumstances, I would have been outraged by this latest misallocation of recognition. After all, Callie was not the only one who had found the key. I had hidden it very carefully after all. But Callie accepted the treat only slowly. Then he came over to Jewel and touched my paw with his nose. No accusation. No superiority. Only closeness. I looked at him. "You didn't have to expose me," I said. Callie sat down. "You could have simply found the key again, in secret." Callie tilted his head. But that was probably too complicated. His tail thumped the floor once. Jewel held me even more tightly. "I'm going anyway, Cleo." The sentence was gentle. That was exactly why it hurt. "I know," I said. Of course, she could not hear what I said. Or perhaps she could. Humans sometimes understood more than they admitted. "But I'll come back," she continued. "Very often, and you can visit me. Callie, of course. And you." She looked at me. "You'll have to inspect the apartment thoroughly first, won't you?" I opened my eyes. That was a sensible remark. An apartment Jewel lived in obviously required a professional inspection. It could not possibly be left to its own devices. There were windowsills to examine, radiators, cabinets, possibly boxes. I placed one paw against her cheek. Jewel smiled. Then she carefully set me down. The next few minutes became noisy. Boxes were carried, bags were closed. Anna searched once more for a charging cable that was obviously lying on the kitchen table. Tom explained the best way to load the trunk, even though Jewel had been putting things into it herself for an hour. Kale ran back and forth among everyone, this time with more movement in his tail again. But beneath the noise lay something else, a tug, an ending disguised as a beginning. When Jewel rolled her suitcase toward the car, Kale stopped at the front door. He watched her go, his tail hung low. Then he went to her, pressed his head against her hip, and stayed there. Jewel knelt down beside him. "Hey," she said, "I'm not gone." Kale licked her hand. Anna turned to the side and pretended she urgently needed to check the trunk. Tom cleared his throat. I sat on the stairs. I could have stayed there, dignified, controlled, like a cat who understood that humans sometimes needed their strange migrations. But then Jewel opened the passenger door. The seat smelled like her sweater, like coffee, like the road. Before anyone could say anything, I jumped in. I landed on the passenger seat, turned around once in a circle, and sat down. Jewel stopped. Then she laughed, not loudly, but genuinely. "Of course," she said. Tom raised his hands. "Cleo's coming too?" "Only as far as the apartment," Jewel said. Anna looked at me. "It'll be too much for her." I looked at Anna. It was time humans understood. I was not small. I was merely compact. Kale stood outside beside the open door. He looked at me. His ears tipped slightly backward. I knew he could not come along. Not now. Someone had to stay at the house. Someone had to watch over his blanket, the garden, the spot in front of Jewel's bedroom door that would soon smell different. "I'm only checking the route," I said. Kale's tail wagged almost imperceptibly. Then he touched the doorframe with his nose. A farewell in his own way. Jewel sat behind the wheel. The engine started. I did not flinch, not because I was not afraid, but because I was busy claiming the seat properly. Through the window I saw Kale, Anna, and Tom standing in front of the house. Kale grew smaller as the car slowly pulled away. My first impulse was to leap from the seat, run to the door, and undo everything. Hide the key again, scratch the tires, lie beneath the brake pedal. There were many ways to make a plan when you were desperate enough. Instead, I stayed where I was. Jewel briefly placed her hand against my side. "It's okay," she said. No, I thought. Not everything, but perhaps not everything had to be okay for things to continue. I looked back one more time. Kale stood by the garden gate. He did not bark. He simply stayed there until we disappeared around the #10. Different is not a mistake. On new spaces, old habits, and what remains. The house had grown quieter. Kala did not like it. Neither did I, although in a more cultivated manner. Silence was normally one of my favorite qualities in a room. Silence meant no vacuum cleaner, no toaster, no people talking on the phone while looking for their keys. Silence meant warm window seats, uninterrupted grooming, and the chance to think about life without someone asking whether you were hungry. But this silence was different. It was not empty because no one was speaking. It was empty because someone was missing. On the morning after Jewel moved out, Kala sat in front of her bedroom door. He sat there as if he had been given an assignment. The door was open. Beyond it, the room was tidy, which was suspicious on principle. The bed had been stripped. The shelf was almost empty. Only the small lamp still stood on the desk because Jewel had forgotten it on the first trip. And because apparently, people always forgot at least one lamp when saying goodbye. Kala looked into the room, then down the hallway, then back into the room. I was lying on Jewel's dark green sweater, which Anna had draped over the armchair in the living room. She had said, "I'll take that over later." Later, a word people used for things they were not yet able to let go of. The sweater smelled fainter than it had yesterday. Not because Jewel was suddenly less Jewel. Scents did not disappear that quickly. But the house had begun to get used to her absence, and I considered that poor character. Callus stood up. He walked slowly into the living room, stopped in front of the armchair, and sniffed the sweater. "It's occupied," I said. Calla looked at me. "I'm lying on it," he sniffed again. "This is not an invitation to shared grief counseling." Callus sat down. His ears hung a little lower than usual. I closed my eyes. The fabric beneath me had become warm. Or perhaps I had become warm. Sometimes it was difficult to tell such things apart. "She'll come back," I said. Calla raised his head. "She said so." His tail moved once across the floor. "People say many things," I went on. "Tom, for example, regularly says he'll clean out the basement over the weekend. Anna says she'll only sit down for a moment after dinner. And Mrs. Kruger says Hugo understands every word." Calla blinked. "But Jules said it," I added more quietly. "That's different." Calla lay down beside the armchair. His back did not touch the front of my paws. He kept his distance as he had learned to do by now. That was one of his more remarkable developments. In the past he had treated closeness like a ball. You immediately ran toward it and hoped it would join in. Now he sometimes knew that staying also meant not wanting too much. We lay there like that for a while. Then the front door burst open. Calla was on his feet immediately. It was only Anna, returning from shopping with 2 bags. Calla ran into the hallway, wagged his tail, sniffed, turned in a circle once, and looked past her through the open door. No Jewel. His tail slowed. Anna noticed. Of course she noticed. People overlooked a remarkable amount, but when a dog was visibly sad, they often suddenly paid attention. Perhaps because Calla wore his feelings so openly that even Tom could not fit them into a spreadsheet. Anna set down the bags and crouched. "She's coming on Sunday," she said, stroking Calla's cheeks. "Then we'll all go over there." Calla wagged cautiously. I opened one eye. "All?" Anna looked over at me. "Yes, Cleo, you too." I closed my eye again. It was not as though I had been waiting for an invitation, but a new apartment without my approval was a risk no responsible cat could accept. The following days were unpleasantly normal. Tom went to work and came back, looking for his glasses at least twice, and once actually sitting on them. Anna put things away that had already been put away, which apparently was her way of dealing with unease. Kale went for walks. I inspected the house. But every routine had a gap in it. At breakfast, Kale looked toward Jules' empty chair. Whenever the doorbell rang, he ran to it and after the first bark, paused as if he had to check whether Hope made a sound. In the evenings, he sometimes stood in front of her door. So did I, though only because the upstairs hallway held the warmth the longest. On the 3rd evening, Anna found him lying on Jules' side of the bed. She sat down beside him on the floor. Kale lifted his head when she touched his shoulder. "It's strange, isn't it?" Anna said. Kale breathed out. "For me too." She looked into the room. "I'm happy for her, really." And still, her voice did not break. Anna rarely let her feelings get that far. She sorted them beforehand, presumably into mental drawers, neatly labeled, "Later, not now, and it'll be fine." Kale rested his head on her leg. Anna stroked his ears. I sat in the doorway. "People are strange," I said. Anna looked at me. "Yes, Cleo, we are. They make their children grow up, then they are surprised when they leave." Anna smiled sadly. "Something like that." I took a step into the room. The floor smelled of dust, wood, and what remained of Jewel. I jumped onto the windowsill and sat there. "She isn't leaving because this house was wrong," Anna said after a while. "She's leaving because she needs one of her own." I looked outside. In the garden, the wind moved through the bushes. Kale's ball still lay beneath the lavender bush. Tom had forgotten it, and Kale had, unusually, not found the energy to demand it back. A home of one's own. I understood the thought. Not completely, but enough. I liked my house, my windowsill, my box, my half of the couch, the staircase from which one could monitor all important events. But I also liked that I decided for myself when I was in which room. Closeness was pleasant only when it was not commanded. Perhaps Jewel needed a place where she could decide too. The thought did not make it easier, but it made it less wrong. On Sunday, the whole family drove to Jewel's place. Kale recognized the preparations as soon as Tom took the leash from its hook. He ran to the door, wagged, spun around, barked once, and ran back again to make sure everyone truly understood that something important was about to happen. I was placed in my carrier. I would like to state that a carrier is not an appropriate means of transport. It is a small plastic box with a barred door and the outrageous claim that safety is more important than freedom of movement. Kale, on the other hand, was allowed to sit in the back seat. With a harness. He wore the harness like a medal. "You have it good," I said. Anna looked at me. "Yes, Cleo, we are. They make their children grow up, then they are surprised when they leave." Anna smiled sadly. "Something like that." I took a step into the room. The floor smelled of dust, wood, and what remained of Jewel. I jumped onto the windowsill and sat there. "She isn't leaving because this house was wrong," Anna said after a while. "She's leaving because she needs one of her own." I looked outside. In the garden, the wind moved through the bushes. Kale's ball still lay beneath the lavender bush. Tom had forgotten it, and Kale had unusually not found the energy to demand it back. A home of one's own. I understood the thought. Not completely, but enough. I liked my house, my windowsill, my box, my half of the couch, the staircase for which one could monitor all important events. But I also liked that I decided for myself when I was in which room. Closeness was pleasant only when it was not commanded. Perhaps Jewel needed a place where she could decide too. The thought did not make it easier, but it made it less wrong. On Sunday, the whole family drove to Jewel's place. Kale recognized the preparations as soon as Tom took the leash from its hook. He ran to the door, wagged, spun around, barked once, and ran back again, to make sure everyone truly understood that something important was about to happen. I was placed in my carrier. I would like to state that a carrier is not an appropriate means of transport. It is a small plastic box with a barred door and the outrageous claim that safety is more important than freedom of movement. Kale, on the other hand, was allowed to sit in the back seat. With a harness. He wore the harness like a medal. "You have it good," I said. Anna looked at me. "Yes, Cleo, we are. They make their children grow up, then they are surprised when they leave." Anna smiled sadly. "Something like that." I took a step into the room. The floor smelled of dust, wood, and what remained of Jewel. I jumped onto the windowsill and sat there. "She isn't leaving because this house was wrong," Anna said after a while. "She's leaving because she needs one of her own." I looked outside. In the garden, the wind moved through the bushes. Kale's ball still lay beneath the lavender bush. Tom had forgotten it, and Kale had, unusually, not found the energy to demand it back. A home of one's own. I understood the thought. Not completely, but enough. I liked my house, my windowsill, my box, my half of the couch, the staircase from which one could monitor all important events. But I also liked that I decided for myself when I was in which room. Closeness was pleasant only when it was not commanded. Perhaps Jewel needed a place where she could decide too. The thought did not make it easier, but it made it less wrong. On Sunday, the whole family drove to Jewel's place. Kale recognized the preparations as soon as Tom took the leash from its hook. He ran to the door, wagged, spun around, barked once, and ran back again, to make sure everyone truly understood that something important was about to happen. I was placed in my carrier. I would like to state that a carrier is not an appropriate means of transport. It is a small plastic box with a barred door and the outrageous claim that safety is more important than freedom of movement. Kale, on the other hand, was allowed to sit in the back seat. With a harness. He wore the harness like a medal. "You have it good," I said. Anna looked at me. "Yes, Cleo, we are. They make their children grow up, then they are surprised when they leave." Anna smiled sadly. "Something like that." I took a step into the room. The floor smelled of dust, wood, and what remained of Jewel. I jumped onto the windowsill and sat there. "She isn't leaving because this house was wrong," Anna said after a while. "She's leaving because she needs one of her own." I looked outside. In the garden, the wind moved through the bushes. Kale's ball still lay beneath the lavender bush. Tom had forgotten it, and Kale had, unusually, not found the energy to demand it back. A home of one's own. I understood the thought, not completely, but enough. I liked my house, my windowsill, my box, my half of the couch, the staircase from which one could monitor all important events. But I also liked that I decided for myself when I was in which room. Closeness was pleasant only when it was not commanded. Perhaps Jewel needed a place where she could decide too. The thought did not make it easier, I said, through the barred door. Kale turned his head toward me. You can look out the window, he wagged. You are not being transported in a container that looks like a poorly ventilated breadbasket. Kale panted with excitement. And stop being so happy. That is not an appropriate reaction to a car ride. Tom got into the driver's seat. Anna sat beside him. Kale took the back seat for himself, although his tail occupied roughly half of it. My carrier stood securely on the floor behind Anna. The car set off. The street smelled different from yesterday. Of sunshine, exhaust fumes, bakeries, unfamiliar front gardens. With every turn, the scent of the world slid past me. Kale tried to see through the window, sniffed at the closed glass, and wagged when we drove past a park. I remained quiet. Not because I was afraid. I merely managed my feelings internally. When the car stopped, I heard Kale before the door even opened. His claws scraped against the seat. His breathing quickened. Then the door opened. Kale, slowly, Tom said. Kale was not slow. He jumped out, pulled Tom 2 steps along the sidewalk, and suddenly stood in front of an apartment building with a red brick facade. Jewel was waiting beside the entrance. She wore jeans, a light t-shirt, and her hair down. She looked tired, but tired in a different way than she had over the past few weeks. Not pressed down by thoughts, more like someone who had moved furniture for a long time and eaten too little. When Kale saw her, something happened that even I no longer found ridiculous. He ran toward her. Not uncontrollably. Tom held the leash tightly. But Kale was everywhere at once, at Jewel's legs, at her face, with his tail, with his ears, with that entire large open body that knew only one message. You're here. Jewel knelt down. Kale licked her cheek. She laughed out loud. Hello, you maniac, she said. I was still in my carrier. That is excessive, I said. No one heard me. But Jewel looked over at me, her face softened at once. And there you are. Tom set down the carrier. Jewel opened the door. I waited. One did not show a new environment that one was interested. One had to inspect it first. Then I stepped out. The apartment smelled of paint, wood, cardboard, and Jewel. There was new furniture, not much. A sofa that was still too clean. A small table. 2 chairs that had apparently been bought only so people would not have to sit on the floor while eating. In the kitchen, plates stood on a shelf that seemed far too tidy. I walked slowly through the hallway. Kale was already in the living room, greeting every object as if he had personally missed it. He sniffed the sofa, the corner of the rug. A plant that smelled suspiciously like something Anna would soon call poisonous. Kale, don't lick everything, Jewel said. Kale looked at her. Then he stopped licking. That was probably progress. I jumped onto the windowsill in the living room. It was narrower than mine at home, but acceptable. From there one could see a courtyard, with bicycles, a chestnut tree, and a balcony opposite, where a ginger tabby cat lay. He noticed me. I noticed him. We looked at each other. Then I turned away. One did not have to make social mistakes immediately in every new neighborhood. Cleo, Jewel stood beside a box. Not just any box. It was a large open box, with neatly cut edges, empty. Inside lay a soft folded blanket. I looked at it, then at Jewel. I saved that especially for you, she said. I walked over slowly. It was an excellent box. The walls were sturdy. The blanket smelled of Jewel and a little of laundry detergent. Its location was wisely chosen too, beside the radiator but not directly in the draft, with a view of the sofa, the kitchen, and the apartment door. Without hurry, I jumped inside. I turned around once, then I lay down. Jules sat down beside it on the floor. Kali came over to us, his leash now removed. He wanted to push his nose over the edge of the box. "Don't," I said. Kali paused. I thought for a moment. Then I moved a little to one side. "You may sit there." Kali sat down beside the box. Not inside it. Not too close. Simply beside it. Jewel looked back and forth between us and smiled. "That's almost peaceful. It is a provisional arrangement," I explained. Kali wagged. Tom came into the living room. He looked at the sofa, then at Kali, then at Anna. "Is he allowed up there?" Jewel grinned. "If he lies on a blanket." Anna placed a gray blanket on one end of the sofa. Kali looked at it, then at Jewel. "Okay," Jewel said. He landed a little too heavily, slipped with one paw, and caught himself again. Then he curled up on the blanket as if he had never done anything else. I watched him from my box. So the couch issue was resolved. Not entirely. At home, the middle cushion still belonged to me. That was not up for discussion. But Kale now had a place that was explicitly his. No accident, no exception, no sneaking up with his tail tucked in. A blanket on a sofa. To humans, that might seem small. To Kale, it was probably a certificate. He sighed contentedly. Jules sat on the floor beside my box. Anna brought coffee from the kitchen. Tom began hanging a picture frame, although no one had asked him to, and the wall had acquired a new hole within 3 minutes. It was all chaotic. It was different, but it was also family. I closed my eyes and thought about the dog file. It had begun with a treat. Kale had sat, Tom had praised him, and I had rightly pointed out an inadequate reward system. The evidence was still plentiful. Kale was loud. He was wet whenever there was water anywhere nearby. He was easily bribed. He considered balls a life's purpose and vacuum cleaners the downfall of civilization. He sniffed lampposts, ate too quickly, and believed every visitor was a personal sensation. All of that remained scientifically sound. But the file had gained further entries. Kale waited at doors. He noticed when someone was sad. He could choose a person over a command. He stayed when staying was more important than understanding. And he helped, even when he did not understand why someone would hide a key in a box. I opened my eyes. Kale lay on his blanket on the sofa. His paws twitched in his sleep. Perhaps he was chasing a ball. Perhaps he was dreaming of Jewel. Perhaps he was dreaming of a field made entirely of treats. With Kale, all possibilities were equally likely. Jewel looked over at him, then at me. "Everything okay?" she asked. I blinked slowly. Yes, not like before, but in a new way. Suddenly, Kale jumped up. Outside in the courtyard, someone had thrown a ball. A child laughed. The ball bounced over the paving stones. Kale ran to the balcony door. His tail hit the table. "No," Tom said automatically. "You're staying inside." Kale sat down. He looked at the ball, then at Tom, then at the ball again. I remained lying in my box. Kale liked balls. I liked boxes. Jewel liked her new apartment, even though it still smelled of paint and unfamiliar walls. Anna needed lists. Tom needed rules, even though he was slowly learning that not everything important fit into them. We were different. That was not a weakness, nor was it a hierarchy. Kale did not jump off the sofa because he had less dignity than I did. I did not stay in the box because I loved less than he did. He showed his joy with his whole body. I showed my affection by staying when I could have left. I gave a slight nod. He wagged. I rested my head on my paws. He was happy. So was I. That was probably the whole truth. You did not have to chase the same things, like the same rules, or say goodbye in the same way, in order to be at home together.